After finishing his breakfast and protein shake, Scott grabbed his tennis bag, opened the door of the cozy bed and breakfast, and stepped out into the warm morning. It was only 7 a.m., but his car showed it was already 91 degrees outside. He felt a smile come to his face. Texas summers can be tough, especially in the hill country, and the summer of 2022 was especially hot. Austin had reported 57 days over 100 degrees so far, although they were celebrating the end of a 21-day streak of very high temperatures, which had finally dropped to just 99 degrees on Thursday. This slight break was thanks to clouds and humidity coming in from the coast. Though it was just 99 degrees, the humidity was much higher, jumping from 30% to 70%, making the heat index feel like 106. The high humidity made his early morning run along Lady Bird Lake feel particularly rough, but he remained dedicated to his running, weight training, boxing workouts, and the 2 tennis leagues he played in. Some acquaintances teased him to get a life, but he felt content with how he spent his days. While maybe not entirely happy, staying busy from dawn until after dark kept him from falling back into feelings of sadness and anger. The local tennis tournament, known for its tough competition, was a true test of endurance, but Scott felt sure that no one else was as prepared as he was. He was ready for 3, 4, or even 5 matches in a single day. Even during his college years, he had never been in such good shape. Scott felt confident that if he found himself in a tough match in the afternoon sun, he could outlast his opponent, even if he wasn't the better player. As he drove away from the bed and breakfast, Scott thought about his recent life with a mix of dark humor and frustration. Since graduating college in December 2020, he had plenty of experience with online classes and part-time work, which helped him in his current job in IT security, where he worked from home. Living alone since April 2020, he learned the importance of having discipline in his mental, emotional, and physical life to manage everything successfully. Thanks to his strong self-discipline, he was very productive at work and focused on personal growth, pushing himself to reach new levels of strength, flexibility, and conditioning. He wished he had applied this same drive during high school and the early years of college. But as he drove through the small town toward the beautiful tennis center that his university would have loved to own, he remembered that he hadn't always been as focused as he was now. In his first 2 years at his well-regarded and costly college, part of his tuition had been covered by a tennis scholarship, with the rest paid for by academic grants. It turned out to be a mixed blessing. His parents had saved money for college, and he earned some while in high school. So when he got the scholarships, he had extra money to spend, and he used a good bit of it before starting classes. His first big buy was a year-old Jeep Cherokee that he got from a wealthy family friend. The friend's daughter wanted a new BMW for her senior year, so Scott got the Jeep at a great price. Next, Scott went shopping for clothes with his favorite cousin, who always kept up with the latest styles. She picked outfits to help him fit in with the other kids at school and get noticed. She insisted that he model each outfit before she decided he was ready for college. She even made him wear one of the outfits as they got lunch together. After lunch, she called him handsome and gave him a quick kiss. "Go get 'em. And if those girls don't see how great you are, come back to your cousin. I'll take care of you. Remember, we're just third cousins, so it's all good." Even though they were only third cousins, they felt unusually close after that. Excited about college and eager to leave his high school friends behind, he went to rush events early. His tennis coach warned him that joining a fraternity might not be a good idea, but an older cousin convinced him it would help him meet girls, so he joined anyway. However, the demands of fraternity life, college tennis, and keeping up with his studies didn't go well together. He could only manage 1 semester as an active member, but it was a fun semester, and he made some connections that would last. He enjoyed the attention from the sorority girls and the fans who came out to support the tennis players after they won a big tournament on campus. Scott didn't mind who he dated, so he had plenty of chances to improve his dating skills. Everything changed in April 2019 when he met Amelia Anderson. They felt drawn to each other from the very start, so much so that they married in August, just before the new school year. They lived happily together for 7 months, until everything started to change dramatically in March 2020. Lost in his thoughts, Scott made the last turn into the parking lot at the tennis center and almost had an accident. In front of him was a white Jeep Compass with the tailgate up. and leaning into the back were the longest, most beautiful legs he had ever seen, sticking out from a tennis skirt. She was leaning in, hiding the rest of her. He didn't know what the rest of her looked like, but he quickly got lost in his thoughts. People say you naturally move towards what catches your eye, and he was captivated by her lovely legs and what he could see of her shorts. About 10 yards away, he hit the brakes, turned sharply to the left, and parked in the small lot. His heart raced for several reasons, including the close call with his dream girl, or at least her amazing legs. He hoped the rest of her looked just as good. He got out of the car and pretended to stretch his back while keeping his gaze on her. He walked to the back, opened the tailgate, and pulled out a tennis bag without looking away from her. Her long, dirty blonde hair was in a ponytail. She was tall and slim, with a small waist that made her short skirt sit high. So far, so good. She found what she was looking for, put it in her bag, grabbed the strap, and turned around, catching Scott watching her. He tried to stop looking, but the rest of her was just as stunning as her legs. She stood about 5'8", matching his 5'10", and was slender. Even from a distance, her features seemed well balanced. She had a narrow nose, light-colored eyes, probably green, high cheekbones, and full lips. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She blinked, smiled, and walked closer. He was stuck in place until she was just a step away. She extended her hand. "Hi, you look kind of familiar, but I can't remember your name. If we've met, I apologize for not recalling." "I'm Sabrina Rektar. I grew up here but just graduated from college in May." He was right, she had one of those rare green eyes. Regaining his composure after seeing her up close and hearing her voice, he said, "Well, congratulations. That's a great achievement." "I'm Scott Carr, and I'm sorry for staring, but I couldn't help it. Your legs are the most beautiful I've ever seen." She blushed and rolled her eyes, saying, "I appreciate that, but in school they called me Giraffe and Stick Woman because I was so tall and skinny. I filled out a bit in college, but I still feel like Stick Woman. It's nice to hear compliments, but I'm not sure I believe you." Scott looked at her in disbelief and asked, "Don't you have mirrors where you live? Are the men around you blind? You are truly lovely from top to bottom." Her smile lit up her face as she took his arm and laughed. "Come with me. I need to find a partner for the tournament, maybe two, but I want you to stay close so you can help boost my confidence." Scott dropped his bag on the grass, closed the tailgate of his car, picked up the bag, and followed her to the tournament office. "By the way, my name is Sabrina Rektar. I don't think we've met before. I would definitely remember if we had, even if you were in your glamorous phase before becoming a swimsuit model." She laughed and shook her head. "You are quite the charmer." "Sabrina, you made it," said the friendly blonde at the desk. "I did. Are you still planning to be my doubles partner even though we haven't practiced all summer?" "Of course. Maybe we can win this year. I've been practicing whenever my husband can watch the kids, and I've also been playing in a local league on Wednesday nights, so hopefully I won't make too many mistakes this time." A muscular blonde man was stringing a racket in the back corner and smiled at their conversation. He called out, "Hey, Sabrina, good to see you. Sarah was worried you might not make it back from Colorado on time." "Hey, Ken, have you found me a mixed doubles partner yet since you're playing with your wife this year? That guy right beside you is looking for a mixed partner and might be a good fit. You could see if he's up for the challenge." Scott quietly listened to the friendly banter. Even though he and Ken were college rivals, they were also good friends and were playing doubles in the open division. He was close friends with Ken's sister Sarah, who was giving him a hopeful look. Sabrina turned her head and looked at him with curiosity. He quickly raised his hands and said, "I would really like to be your partner, Sabrina, but I have to warn you that I might struggle serving with you close at the net. Would you be okay staying back when I serve?" Sarah laughed at Sabrina's confused expression. "Don't mind him. He can be a handful and talks too much. But he's a good partner. We won this tournament 4 years ago." "All right. Play two back on your serve, but why?" she asked. "I told you that you have the most wonderful legs I've ever seen. I might get distracted if I'm serving with you right there." Sarah shouted, "See?" Ken laughed and added, "That was bad, Carr. You've really lost your charm with women." Sabrina rolled her eyes and said, "Okay, Mr. Carr, are you done with those silly lines? If so, I'd like to warm up on court 10 before the crowd gets here." If your tennis game is as weak as your flirting, I need a better partner. She picked up her bag and walked to the court. Scott grabbed his bag and looked at his friends. Their smiles had faded. Ken spoke seriously. Hey, it's great to see you here. We were wondering if you'd actually come. Thanks for being here. I can't wait to play doubles with you. Thanks, Ken. It's nice to be here. I think I really need this. Sarah had tears in her eyes and her voice quivered. Big brother, you don't just need this. You deserve it. I don't know where you're staying, but Grandpa Ray will be upset if you don't stay at his house. Our parents will want you over for dinner every night after the tournament. We'll all be there, and you cannot say no. Thanks, Sarah. I would love one of your mom's great meals and to be around good friends. Her tears flowed, and there was sadness in her voice. Scott, we're so sorry we couldn't come too. He quickly interrupted. I understand, Sarah, no one could come. We had a small service with just her parents and me, and even then we had to keep our distance. This virus has caused so much trouble. From afar, he heard Sabrina asking if he was coming, so he took a deep breath, forced a smile, and turned to leave. Sarah quickly called out, Scott! She's a wonderful girl and my best friend. She just got out of a tough relationship, so be kind. He sighed. Sarah, I haven't even thought about dating since April 2020. I have no idea why I find her attractive, but trust me when I say those days ended when I got married in 2019. Well, Ken said casually, you know she's a lovely person and has a great personality too. You like her style, so give it a chance. Remember, she's been through a lot as well. Scott forced a smile and walked towards the court gate, watching Sabrina bounce a ball on her racket strings. She was fit and athletic, and he appreciated her overall presence. As soon as he placed his bag down and took out his racket, Sabrina moved to the far side of the court and challenged, Let's see what you've got, pretty boy. He stumbled slightly, almost dropping his racket. That was what his wife used to call him. His eyes began to tear up, but he steadied himself and walked to the baseline. How could? He wondered before he looked up to see her smiling at him. She sent a gentle shot his way and he returned it almost automatically. Their warm-up started. It took a little while, but as he moved and focused on the ball, his sadness began to fade away. 10 minutes into their warm-up, he was playfully teasing her, enjoying their time on the court. She felt most confident from the baseline. She had a strong topspin forehand and a powerful two-handed backhand that she placed perfectly. Her net play was solid and she confidently hit overhead shots. Her serve was always well-paced and accurately placed. The area around the office was now bustling with players, and Sarah began making court assignments over the loudspeaker. They put their rackets away, wiped their brows with towels, and took sips from their water bottles. If I pass the audition, it looks like you can play either side in doubles. How do you feel about playing the deuce court? I can do both, but my backhand is a little stronger from the ad court, he said. Great. I can play either too, but I prefer the deuce court. And yes, I believe you'll do just fine as a doubles partner, she replied with a playful smile. But you still have to stay back on my serve. My opinion hasn't changed, he teased. She playfully hit his arm, grabbed her bag, and said, Come on, we need to get our singles assignments. One of the best parts about the tournament in their small community was that, in the first 3 rounds, the open division matches were held at the tennis center. The age group matches took place at various local courts, some in town and others up to 20 miles away in the countryside. As a youth participating in this tournament, he enjoyed playing at the country courts. The sponsors provided bottled water and soda in coolers at each site, and the owners offered snacks, chairs, shade trees, and sometimes swimming pools to use between matches. He knew he wouldn't play in the 35S division for another 10 years, but he could imagine himself relaxing in the shade, enjoying drinks with his hosts and fellow players. Tennis was a social event here, even though it was highly competitive. That's how it should be. Feeling happy and relaxed walking back to the office with his fun new partner, he almost bumped into her when she suddenly stopped. He managed to lightly nudge her and looked over her shoulder to see what made her freeze. Just like that, his good mood vanished. Darian Huxley! Right there in front of him! His heart raced, especially when his rivals smirked at them. Well! Not surprised you two are together! Birds of a feather! He sneered. Scott began to move past Sabrina. He felt like confronting Darian right then. But to his surprise, Sabrina raised her hand and said firmly, Here's to birds of a feather! Darian. Now leave before my boyfriend comes over here. Darian kept smiling, but Scott's angry face made even him a bit nervous. He grabbed the arm of the pretty girl next to him. "See you later," he said as he walked her toward the bleachers. The girl looked surprised, but followed him. Scott sighed and turned to Sabrina. "How do you know him?" She seemed taken aback. "How do you know him?" Scott replied, "It's a long story, and I won't share it unless I've had too much to drink. Now it's your turn." Sabrina's voice was strong. "I'm embarrassed to say I dated that jerk. I thought about accepting his proposal. My friends told me I was just one of many he was seeing, and he just wanted more than a relationship. He is the worst kind of person. I know. Let's just focus on getting our assignments and try to stay calm before our matches. If we don't, I'll be in the lower bracket for the second round, and I think you will too." Sarah had watched the whole thing unfold and looked guilty. When Sabrina glared at her, she quickly said, "He signed up as D.B. Huxley from Midland. We had no clue it was Darian, I promise." Sabrina's stern expression softened when she faced her best friend. She sighed and said, "I'll be all right. It was just shocking to see him here in my hometown." Scott looked at Ken with a serious face. Ken stopped what he was doing and came closer. "Sarah is right. We had many participants in different divisions, so we might not have noticed. I thought he was from Dallas, and if I had known he was using Midland as his address, I would have warned you. Now, with the local doctors playing in the tournament, do you think we need to have one around just in case? I remember your promise. Is he in my bracket at all?" Ken and Sarah checked the singles and doubles brackets before Ken shook his head. "No, you both would need to reach the finals to meet him. That's good news. Just a heads up, I plan to make it there. Do you think he will? He didn't provide much for seeding info, so he's not seeded. He has to get past the 4th seed in the second round, and the 1st seed in the semifinals to meet you in singles. We seeded you second since the number 1 is a former player who won this tournament last year, so he has a tough path ahead. We don't know much about his doubles partner either. He's from Midland as well, so it's a similar situation. You and I are the second seeds, and they are in the top bracket." Sarah jumped in with excitement. "And we're just starting to seed the mixed teams. Since everyone is paired up, I can tell you that he and the girl with dark hair will be in the opposite group from you all." Scott nodded. "That's about as good as it gets, I guess, but you might want to keep the doctors nearby if we face off in any finals. One wrong move or one wrong look. And if you see him coming my way and starting trouble, call for help." There were 10 courts and 16 singles matches in both the women's and men's divisions, starting with the top halves of each group. This gave Sabrina and Scott some time to relax before their turn to play. They spent this time getting to know each other while watching the top players, and later some other matches from the top half of the bracket. They paid no attention to Huxley, who was on court 8 in the back corner, though it was hard not to notice how well he was playing and that he was beating his opponent easily, mainly because he celebrated loudly after every point he scored. Sabrina was the 3rd seed in women's singles. The 2nd seed was a recent high school graduate with 3 state championships, and the top seed was the best player from a Big 12 college, though not one of the strongest teams like Texas or Baylor. There were other top high school players and 2 collegiate players in the mix, as well as a number of club players with solid tennis skills, so she had a tough road ahead. However, she was at the peak of her game, coming off a senior season where she played number 2 singles and 1 doubles for a team that made it to the Division II national tournament. She had worked hard for her ranking just as the others had. Scott was almost 2 years past his final season and should have been slowing down. But after the sad and unexpected loss of his wife, he had spent his free time on tennis and fitness. He felt he was much better now compared to his college days. Playing number 2 singles and number 1 doubles for a team that won the American Athletic Conference Championship showed he had considerable skill. However, Huxley had beaten him in straight sets back in 2019, mainly because Scott let him get under his skin. He had gotten his revenge in doubles, but he was still upset about the words Huxley used to provoke him, and about his own silly reaction. And that anger was minimal compared to, "No!" he told himself, "I'm not going down that path." He was feeling mixed feelings of confusion and anger when his name was called. He picked up the balls and was sent to court 2. His first opponent was a decent club player from Lubbock, but by the end of the first set, he looked like he had faced a giant creature. Scott had started to calm down a bit by the break before the second set when his opponent joked playfully, "I don't know who you're upset with, but trust me, it's not me." Scott thought to himself, "I should win a few points this match so my girlfriend will believe I can play tennis well." Usually Scott was calm and considerate on the court. He didn't let anyone win if they didn't earn it. But he often eased up his game to help less confident players feel better and keep the game going. He liked to chat with them too, but today was different. He hit the ball hard from both sides and was very focused on winning. When Huxley came close to the net, Scott didn't hold back. He lost track of how many aces he served, and he played aggressively. Even the top player who came to watch left shaking his head. Feeling embarrassed after that match, Scott shook Huxley's hand and said sorry before they started again. The second set was much closer, ending with a score of 61. Huxley felt good about how many points he scored. When it finished, Scott's girlfriend praised him for his performance, but then she gave Scott a disapproving look, and he quietly walked away, promising to enjoy future matches and make new friends instead of focusing on his rival. Sabrina was also playing at that time, so Scott missed her match, but he caught the last part of it. Her opponent was a skilled player from Odessa, but Sabrina won easily with a score of 62-62. Scott was impressed with her skills. She moved swiftly and gracefully like a cat. He had to sit in the bleachers and cover his face with a towel to hide how amazed he was. Sarah came over and looked at the score. "Looks like no problem for Sabrina. Carrie is a good player. She won the 16S. But she's not quite ready for the top level in the Open. We set it up so Carrie could go into the consolation bracket, and she should do fine there." "Ken and I watched your match from a distance," she added. "You were really tough that first set." "Sorry about that. He's a nice guy. His only mistake was being my first match after Huxley." "Ken and I talked about your tennis rivalry. It seems to be about more than just tennis, doesn't it?" Scott took a deep breath, then said quietly, "The rivalry is small compared to the bigger issue. But let's not discuss it here, Sarah." "All right. But Mom and Dad found out you're here and want you to join us for dinner tonight. Your matches should wrap up by 7, unless you play like you did against poor Eddie, then you'll be done by 6. Win or lose, I'm going to enjoy my remaining matches unless I face you-know-who in the finals. But for today, expect to see the fun side of me on the court." After that, he and Sabrina went to the office to relax, drink water, and catch up with friends. Scott's next match was scheduled on Court 3, which also had bleachers, against a club pro from Houston named Curtis. He was very steady, relying on keeping the game going and waiting for his opponent to make a mistake. This allowed Scott to focus on improving his strokes, approach shots, and play at the net. Curtis made sure Scott had to work hard, but he didn't think he could defeat someone as reliable as Scott. So Scott felt good about using the match to polish his skills. His strong serves, impressive backhands, and powerful overhead shots drew in a crowd, including many local high school players who came to watch. Sarah sat with Sabrina for a while before switching places with Ken and returning to the tournament desk. Everyone knew the 61-62 score didn't tell the whole story, but Scott's performance impressed Curtis. He invited Scott to participate in the Fall Invitational at the country club where he taught. The best players from Houston and nearby areas would be there, and Curtis promised Scott some strong competition. It was exciting to be invited by the pro, so Scott agreed. Maybe his parents would come see him play. It had been years since they had watched him. Sabrina's match was scheduled later because her opponent needed her full break after a long first match. Scott was leaving the court after his match when her court was called. He walked over to Court 5, found a spot in the bleachers, and watched like she had watched him. Her opponent might have wished she had lost her first match, as Sabrina used Scott's idea of improving her game against a weaker player. The score quickly became 11, and Scott saw how talented Sabrina could be when she used her strengths well, especially at the net. Roy and Anita Jones brought sandwiches on sourdough bread for their 4 children and stayed to chat. There was an awkward moment when Anita mentioned missing the memorial service, but Scott managed it well, pointing out that COVID rules only allowed close family to attend and thanking them for the potted plant he kept in his living room. Sabrina noticed the exchange with concern and turned to Sarah with a questioning look. Sarah subtly shook her head and mouthed, "Later." Sabrina nodded and went back to her sandwich. Another great thing about this tournament was that everyone was guaranteed 3 matches. If you lost in the first 2 rounds, you moved to a consolation bracket, starting at 1:30. This meant Sabrina's quarterfinal match wouldn't start until 5, and Scott's would be at 5:30. With a few hours to spare, Sabrina suggested showing Scott around her hometown. He happily agreed, even though he had visited a few times with his friend Ken. The small town, with its mix of German and Scottish culture, intrigued Scott, who was from the suburbs of Houston. The downtown area mainly featured 2- and 3-story sandstone buildings around a rectangular square that held the historic courthouse. In the square, there were several restaurants, a couple of them with bars. There were also many antique shops, 2 clothing stores, 2 gift shops, and 9 wine bars, according to Scott. He playfully teased Sabrina about the number of places to drink and asked if many people spent time at the wine bars. Sabrina did not find it funny and explained that these businesses had opened in the last 10 years. Many vineyards in the area started producing good grapes, and the town had finally allowed the serving of alcohol. We even have a store selling drinks now, for the first time in my parents' lives. One restaurant with a bar was promoting live music for Saturday night, and Scott thought about inviting Sabrina to go with him. He worried he would be a poor dancer, but he was still eager to spend time with her. To his surprise, Sabrina led him to her mother's workplace called Daddy's Shop. She explained that her family made custom oil field equipment and built gates and fences for homes and ranches. Scott was amazed that they had enough business in a small town, but Sabrina laughed, saying most of their sales came from online orders. Scott felt nervous when Brianna Reichtar, Sabrina's mother, came out to greet him. She was Sabrina's twin, though 20 years older and just as striking. Seeing Scott's nervousness brought a smile to her face as she turned to Sabrina. "I had a feeling," Sabrina said, grinning. "He was nervous with me, so I wanted to see how he reacted to my older sister. Just as I expected." She then told Scott, "Okay, take a breath and introduce yourself to my mom. Just a heads up, she loves to give hugs." Scott shook off his surprise, took Brianna's hand, and instead of shaking it, he bowed slightly. "Scott Carr, at your service, Miss Reichtar. It's a pleasure to meet you." Brianna looked pleasantly surprised. "So, you brought home a gentleman? I'm happy to meet you, even if you seem a bit nervous. How long have you—" "Since about 7 this morning, Mom. I met him at the courts when Ken paired us for mixed doubles. I'm just showing him around, so don't start looking at wedding magazines just yet." She winked at Scott, smiled at Sabrina, and added, "I might you two seem really into each other." "Who is into whom, dear?" asked the tall, strong man who walked into the office. "Doug, this is Scott Carr. Scott, this is my husband and Sabrina's dad, Doug Reichtar." Scott stepped forward, extended his hand, and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reichtar. I met your daughter at the tournament this morning, and she's been giving me a tour." The big man looked down at Scott, shook his hand gently, winked at him, then turned to his daughter and asked, "Another tennis player? Don't you know any hard-working guys?" Sabrina was taken aback by the question. She tensed up, ready to respond to her dad. Just as she was about to speak, her dad stepped forward, pulled her into a hug, and spun her around playfully. "Just kidding, sweetheart. I was just teasing. Besides, you two just met, so you didn't really bring him home, did you?" Sabrina still looked annoyed when he set her down, but he quickly turned to Scott and said, "Would you like to see the shop? I will have to keep you away from the welding area, but we can check it out. We're the 4th largest employer in the county." He continued as he led Scott toward the door he had entered. Mom sat on her desk, legs hanging down, and looked at her daughter with curiosity. "Mom, seriously, we just met. And yet I can see there's something going on, no use denying it. So tell me about him. And by the way, he's cute." Sabrina blushed. "Yes, I'll admit he is, and he seems really nice. But he does have some problems I don't know much about, like that he was married before. I think his wife passed away, maybe from COVID, but I need to get Sarah to tell me the story. Also, we ran into Darian Huxley at the courts, and I think Scott might not like him as much as I do. What are the odds? That shows he has good taste. But I can't believe you haven't looked into that coincidence. It's just too strange. You have to find out, or I'll do it." No, Z, you stay out of it. We're having dinner with the Jones tonight after our last matches. I'm sure Sarah will tell me what she knows. I don't know if I'll share it with you or not, given how much you like to talk, but we'll see." Brianna smiled and winked at her daughter. "Oh, you don't have to tell me, dear. I can probably get it out of him after just a few minutes alone." I noticed the way he looked at me, he would easily be swayed. Sabrina started to say something fierce. "Keep your hands off my—" But her words faded when her mother's smile turned into a playful smirk and she exclaimed, "I knew it!" Doug and Scott came back just then, and Doug announced loudly, "Bree, guess what? I just hired a real internet security expert. Maybe he can teach us how to stop all that phishing and keep our clients safe from fake invoices like what happened to one of our friends." Brianna's smirk turned into a real smile as she focused on Scott. "Really? You know about computer security? Oh my gosh, we really need you. When can you start?" "Mom," Sabrina chimed in, "we're in a tournament until Sunday night, and then he'll need to go home. Right, Scott? Actually, I can set up some tests at night that won't interfere with your work, and I can check back in between matches. Are you free tomorrow?" "Yes and no," Doug replied. "The shop is open until noon because we have a rush order for a big client, but the office will be closed. One of us can open the office for you after your matches tomorrow, and again on Sunday after you're done. I'm happy to pay extra to make sure none of my customers get taken advantage of." Scott smiled. "Let's not worry about costs. You will get a friends and family discount, so it will be affordable. I can get my car, come back and set up a program that works in the background without slowing you down, Miss Reichtar." Sabrina returned to the parking lot, hopped into his Jeep and said, "I want to see you in action," when he looked confused. "All right, but my work might be pretty dull even for me. Are you sure?" She nodded, and they drove back to the shop. It didn't take more than 15 minutes to upload the initial setup, so they chatted with her parents again before continuing to explore the community. Sabrina guided him back to the high school, then told him to go south on the farm to Market Road past the courts. Outside of town, they saw a tennis court where several older players sat under trees, watching a match between two older men while enjoying drinks from large cups. Sabrina joked that the drinks were likely something stronger than soda, since they liked to relax after playing. She assured him they were very good at tennis, but for them, it was mostly about socializing. 10 miles out, they crossed a river with clear water flowing over limestone rocks, creating pools and ripples. She showed him where to park, and they walked along the river, around a bend, to a shaded area where the water was deeper. "We used to swim here," she said. "The owners are really nice. As long as there is no alcohol and we clean up before we leave, we can use the place any time. You can see the fire rings from many years of cookouts and enjoying the warmth of the fire." Sabrina sounded a bit sad, so he stepped closer, put his hand on her shoulder and asked, "Do you miss it?" She sighed and replied, "Sometimes I miss being young. The swimming hole and the swing are still here, but I guess I'm not a teenager anymore." "Oh, of course, you're what, 21? Too old to have fun?" "You know what I mean. Fun feels different now." "Does it? Swimming here and doing tricks off the swing still sounds like fun to me. Want to give it a try?" Sabrina turned to him, saw the playful look in his eyes, blushed and said, "I'll do it if you do, but you have to go first." He took off his shirt and hung it on a nearby branch, kicked off his shoes and reached for his shorts before she got nervous. "I didn't mean it. People come here all the time and you can see this place from the road." "I guess you are too old," he said with a sigh, then smiled. "Or would you do it if it was dark?" She seemed to think about it, her face turning a deeper shade of red as she replied, "It's mid-afternoon, so I guess you'll never know." The ride back was even more fun. After getting through the first awkward moments, they felt relaxed. He was attracted to Sabrina, and she seemed at least a bit attracted to him. So, let the flirting begin. Maybe being back to enjoying life, like playing in a tennis tournament with friends, was going to be more exciting than he expected. He was surprised by that thought. It had been a long time since he had positive feelings about other people, and he never thought he would care about a woman again. There was just something about the striking blonde. Sabrina's opponent in the quarterfinals was a former player at Texas Tech, and she was very skilled. They were tied at 5 in the first set when Scott was called to his match, so he didn't see how the set ended. His opponent was also skilled, but a bit older, maybe 35. Scott felt confident but not too serious until his serve was broken, bringing the score to 44, and he was at risk of being down 45 if his opponent held serve. Then he got focused. He broke back and held his serve, winning the first set 64, and then won the second set easily, 62. He noticed Sabrina watching from a distance during his second set, and she didn't look happy. He hoped she hadn't lost, but it was possible against such a strong opponent. He turned in the score and the balls, then looked at Ken. They split sets. Go cheer her on. Sarah was watching the match. He stood next to her and she quietly said, "She lost the first set 75, won the second by the same score, and they are tied at 4 in this one, with Sabrina serving." It was a big moment, as she had been struggling to keep her serve. "What are the rules about coaching?" he asked. "There aren't many, just be polite. Why do you ask?" "If what I saw in the first set is correct, she should be serving at her opponent's left side, either with a flat serve or a slice. She covers the court well, but doesn't like it when the ball comes to her backhand." Well, it wouldn't reflect well on the tournament director to say that, but if her friend told her from the other side, "Friend? I wish. Fine, I'll do it. Can I get there without walking all the way around?" She showed him a path to cross between the courts. At 15 all, the opponent went to grab her towel, and he relayed what he had told Sarah to Sabrina. She nodded just slightly, then prepared to serve closer to the center. Her slice serve was strong, landing a foot inside the line, and her opponent could only defend with her backhand. The return was high and slow. Sabrina moved to the service line as the ball floated towards her forehand side. She paused and struck a forehand down the line to her opponent's backhand, then moved to the net. The return was well played, but just high enough for Sabrina to gently drop the ball over to the other side. Her opponent didn't try hard for it, she just tapped her racket and said, "Nice point." Sabrina's next two serves led to good outcomes, and it was game point. She hit a strong serve aimed at the Red Raider, who just managed to get her racket on it. The ball hit the net, and now a service break would win the set and the match. They took sips of water and switched sides. With determination on her face, Sabrina took a wide serve to her forehand down the line for a winner. What was her opponent thinking? He wondered. Sabrina's forehand was impressive. The next serve was wide to her opponent's backhand, leading her opponent to advance to the net. Sabrina responded with a defensive lob that her opponent had to chase back to the baseline. The older woman then lobbed it short, and Sabrina finished it off with an overhead, making the score 0-3-0. The following serve was good, but Sabrina returned it deep enough to set herself up for the next shot. She sent a powerful inside-out forehand to her opponent's backhand. It went out of bounds. The score was now 40-love, match point. The final point felt a bit flat. The first serve went into the net, and the second was too soft. Sabrina hit it hard at her opponent's feet and moved closer to the net. Her opponent attempted to hit it past her down the line, but Sabrina made a great reach to return a one-handed backhand winner across the court. She stood for a moment, feeling a mix of emotions, before she straightened up and moved to the center of the net to shake hands. Scott walked back through the empty courts and headed to the office. There were still some matches left to play, but a tennis association officer had arrived to take charge for the evening. This meant Sarah and Ken could go home to tidy up and change clothes. The Jones house was different from the one Scott had visited before, but Ken gave clear directions to the new place. It was pleasant, yet Scott felt it didn't have the charm of their old German-style home. Scott exchanged greetings with Ken and Sarah's partners, as well as their hosts, Anita and Roy. At that moment, Sabrina walked in, and it felt right to greet her with a hug. Dinner was a Mexican pile-on, with a variety of dishes spread out on the counters. There were cheese enchiladas, crispy tacos filled with beef or chicken, beans, rice, and tortillas, along with bowls of fresh lettuce, tomatoes, and avocados. Everyone could choose tea or water to drink. Ken and Sarah were encouraged to go first, so Scott followed them. He was quite hungry, and without thinking, he filled his plate with the tasty food, causing a playful shout of, "Save us some," from the others. He sat across from Sabrina at the 10-person table. Ken and Melissa were next to him, while Sarah and her husband Cody sat beside Sabrina, and their hosts were at the ends. The meal was wonderful, filled with friendly conversation, and Scott couldn't remember the last time he felt this content. In fact, He felt happy. After dinner, they moved to the man cave, where a huge TV was mounted on the wall. They rearranged the chairs and sofas to create a cozy space for chatting. Papa Roy offered everyone a beer from his fridge, which was stocked with light and regular beers. Soon, everyone enjoyed their drinks, and before long, they had a second or third round. Scott focused on talking about his friends' families and caught up on everything that had happened since early 2020. When Roy asked, Sabrina shared her experiences from her senior year and graduation ceremony, but Scott stayed quiet until Anita directed a question at him. "What about you, Scott? What have you been doing since we last saw you during spring break in 2020? With a smile, Scott replied, "I spent the rest of 2020 finishing school. Our graduation ceremony in December wasn't very grand, but that was okay because I already had a job lined up in Austin. I moved to Austin before Christmas and spent the holiday with my parents. Once I settled in, I started working from home on January 3rd. Since then, I've mostly been working, exercising, and playing tennis." Anita asked with care, "What about your social life?" "I'm friendly with the people I play tennis with and some folks at the gym," Scott answered. "We go out sometimes, but my job keeps me busy, so I mostly stay at home. By the way, I live in a really nice apartment. Does anyone want to see some pictures?" He joked, trying to change the subject. Everyone except Sabrina said no, but she took his phone and praised his apartment, the view of downtown Austin, and his big black dog. "What a lovely dog. He's so big, and his coat shines. Where is he?" "My parents are taking care of him this weekend. They will be there until Wednesday, then they will go on their yearly trip to Rockport. I could show you the security footage, but it might not be suitable for everyone. They are older but still active, if you know what I mean." Sabrina turned red and gave his phone back, as if his parents would suddenly show up on the screen. Anita exclaimed, "Old? Your parents are younger than we are, and we're still young. Are they even in their mid-40s? "They could both be in their 40s, but not in their 50s, he responded with a smile. "See? They are young," Anita said. Her kids started teasing that 45 isn't really that young, and Scott felt relieved he had steered the conversation away from his personal life and the question he knew everyone wanted to ask. They laughed together for a few more minutes, then Ken and Melissa announced they needed to go home to help the babysitter. Sarah and Cody said they needed to check on Cody's mom, and all four of them got up. Sabrina and Scott stood up with them, and everyone began hugging and thanking the elder Jones for the wonderful meal. Roy shook Scott's hand, gave him a quick hug, and warned, "Watch out for deer on the way to Dad's place." Then he noticed Scott's expression and asked, "You're staying at Dad's river cabin, right?" Everyone paused. I didn't want to trouble anyone, so I got a B&B, Scott responded. "Oh no!" Roy exclaimed and turned to his son. "Does Dad know you are here?" Ken shrugged, and Roy looked back at Scott. "You better hope he doesn't find out you're here and not at the river cabin. You know what he said last time you came?" "That was 3 years ago. I wasn't sure if it would still be available since I signed up for the tournament late. Maybe you got lucky and he let someone else use it. I'll check tonight, but you better move your things to the courts tomorrow. You shouldn't be paying for a room here, young man." Scott agreed to that and joined the others as they walked to his Jeep. "Sorry, I should have thought of that when I got your entry," Ken said. "I honestly forgot, but he's right. Grandpa will be really upset if he finds out you're here and not staying with him. He asked about it the last 2 years, but I guess he missed it this year. I'll let you know, but bring your things tomorrow. Mom and Dad will host you, even if the cabin is busy. Of course, if you get the cabin, we are having a fun swimming party on Sunday night after all this is done. We all need a break, even if you don't, so don't plan on going home before Monday." As he drove back to the small bed and breakfast, Scott made excuses for not answering Mrs. Jones's question completely. His reasons were significant: his wedding in the Caribbean in August 2020, and the memorial service for his wife just 7 months and 10 days later. He tried to justify this to himself. She had only asked what he had been up to since March 2020. She had not mentioned Amelia. Sabrina was leaning down to get her bag when Scott turned the corner. She wore a light blue tennis skirt with matching shorts and a white top. Her tennis shoes had light blue accents. He smiled. She might be tall and slim, but she definitely had a feminine style, which he liked. They walked together toward the courts and paused by the bulletin board to check the draw for the semifinals. Darian was playing the top seed, but neither of them knew the competitor, so they walked over to ask Sarah and Ken. They discovered Scott's opponent was a local boy who played for UTSA. Sabrina's opponent was Barbara Benedict from Midland, who was also Darian's top competitor. Sabrina was not happy she hadn't prepared for this match and knew nothing about her opponent's style. All I can say is her past matches show she played for West Texas AANDM, but they don't say whether she played first or last, Ken explained. She wasn't seeded but managed to beat Ali, who was ranked third, so she must be quite good. Sabrina's jaw tightened, signaling her frustration, but she said, "Mom and Dad are coming to watch. I hope they don't see me lose." Sarah added, "So are our parents, just to add more pressure, but you need to calm down and focus. You've beaten some strong college players, Sabrina. You can do this." "Thanks, sis. I'll give it my best. So, which court?" "Court 2, the other women's singles is on court 1, Sarah replied quietly. "Perfect," Sabrina said with a roll of her eyes. "That should mean the biggest crowd for my defeat." "What about me? What court?" Scott asked. "You'll be on court 2 when their match finishes." "Great. I'll get to cheer for you. Should I stay quiet or chime in if I see something?" Sabrina looked at him with appreciation. "Help me if you can, but don't make me think too much. I struggle with both." He shook his head and smiled. "You're going to do amazing, Tiger." The singles semifinals were set to start at 8. By 7:45, the bleachers for courts 1 and 2 were full, and people were setting up lawn chairs. Sabrina felt a lot of pressure as she went to the court to warm up, and she received many good wishes from her fans. She showed clear signs of nerves during practice, and it only got harder when the match started. Scott didn't offer any advice because he thought she was struggling, so he and the crowd would just clap when she did something right. Darian was watching happily from the stands next to court 1, taking Scott's warning seriously. After falling behind 0-5, Sabrina moved to the north side of the courts. Standing by the fence, she looked embarrassed and frustrated. Scott walked up behind her and urged, "Calm down, Sabrina. You can still win, but you need to focus and show her your strength. You have to win 2 sets to move on, and you can do it, but you need to show up now. So, get ready and play." He then wandered to the concession stand, bought a bottle of water, and then returned, ignoring Darian along the way. When he reached court 2, he heard cheers from the fans, just in time to hear Sabrina call out, "40 love," before she served. She tossed the ball high and served it where her opponent couldn't reach it. After that, she got ready to receive. The nervous girl who had started the match had transformed into a confident player. She slapped her thigh with enthusiasm and encouraged herself, "Come on!" Once seated, Scott watched in amazement as Sabrina played with incredible skill. She hit every shot hard, seemed to know exactly how to handle the ball, and did it well. She made her opponent run all over the court and corrected her mistakes. It was thrilling to watch. After 12 games, Sabrina won with scores of 75-60 and was heading to the finals. She quickly shook hands with her bewildered opponent, leaned her racket against the fence, opened the gate, and ran over to Scott. "Thank you! You're the best coach ever! You knew exactly what to say! Thank you so much!" Scott let her hug him for a moment before her parents, the Joneses, and a group of friends gathered around her. Her dad finally got to Scott and eagerly asked, "What did you tell her?" Scott shrugged and replied, "I just told her to focus." Roy, who had joined them, heard Scott's response. He and Doug burst into laughter and couldn't stop. Once they calmed down, Doug said, "All that money I spent on lessons and all it took was," leading them to laugh again. Scott shrugged again, picked up his bag, and walked to the court where his next opponent was waiting. Young Terry was skilled and ready to entertain the home crowd. He held on as long as he could, but by the 6th game, the older, more experienced player had started to take advantage of every mistake and weakness. Scott won with scores of 63, 61, and a humbled Terry told him he was the best he ever played against. Most of Sabrina's fans had stayed to watch the local player, and they quickly praised the great match they had just seen. Roy and Anita, Doug and Brianna and Sabrina congratulated Terry on his effort and then turned to Scott. "We were going to share some wise words," Roy said seriously, "but you were on point from the start." This made everyone laugh, including the 2 wives. Sabrina shook her head, hugged Scott, and told the group, "He did more than that. Leave me out of it." She started to turn away, looking a bit upset, but Scott gently took her arm, turned her to face him, and sincerely said, "Sabrina, that was the best show of focus and skill I've ever seen. Really, you were amazing after the first few games." The way she looked at him was intense, but she just rested her forehead against him and quietly said, "Thank you. I owe you one." On the next court, Darian had defeated the top seed with scores of 64-62, setting up the finals that Scott was worried about. He wasn't scared of playing Darian. He was much better now than when they faced off in 2019. But he was anxious about losing his temper, which could lead to trouble. He even wondered if losing control might be worth it. The singles finals were scheduled for 12:30, with the men's championship on court 1 and the women's on court 2. The temperature was already 95 degrees, and it was expected to reach 100 by noon, with a high of 106 later on. Scott felt proud of his tough training routines as he prepared to face his rival. He didn't want to admit it, but Darian had been a real challenge for him. Today, he promised himself, everything would change on the tennis court. He couldn't change past events, but he knew he would take a chance for revenge if it came. 70 minutes later, they picked up their balls and walked to their courts. Sabrina's opponent was a tall woman, about 5'11" inches and 185 pounds, hitting every ball with great force, even during warm-ups. Sabrina looked a bit intimidated. At 6'2" inches and around 210 pounds, Darian was 4 inches taller and over 30 pounds heavier than Scott. He gave a confident smirk at Scott, knowing he could easily get into his mind. Last time, Darian had brought up a girl they both dated, but this time he was ready with even more ways to get under Scott's skin. He planned to make fun of him from start to finish. Darian loved to bully on the court. During the warm-up, he hit hard and aggressive, giving Scott little chance to settle in. When it was time to start the match, Darian confidently walked to the net, eager to intimidate Scott. Scott stopped at the serving line and said firmly, "Call it," as he spun his racket. Darian won the toss, chose to serve, and they took their positions without saying anything more. Darian fired off a powerful serve, but Scott managed to return it deep. Darian followed up with a strong shot aimed at Scott's backhand, which Scott returned to the deep middle of the court. Darian quickly moved and hit a cross-court shot with spin. Scott rushed in, caught the ball high, and sent it down the line, moving closer to the net. Darian responded with a backhand shot, but Scott positioned himself well and angled it for a point. Darian won the next point with a strong serve, and then quickly rushed to the net after a deep forehand that pushed Scott back. He held his serve, but Scott responded well and held his own without losing a point. The first set continued in this pattern for the first 8 games. At 44, while Darian was serving, Scott noticed Darian's first slow step. He felt pleased as he waited for the big serve he was sure would come. Darian's game was all about power now. He served wide to Scott's forehand, but Scott returned it down the line, which forced Darian to run for a backhand. Scott wasn't going to rush in this time. He placed the ball into the forehand side, but Darian reached it and sent a decent shot right back at Scott. Scott returned it low to the backhand side, and Darian chased after it, trying to lob the ball. It didn't go far enough, and Scott capitalized on that. Darian kept serving hard, but Scott continued making precise returns, forcing Darian to run side to side. Scott managed to break and take the lead at 54. After switching sides, Darian plopped down on the bench and gulped down some water, while Scott just wiped his forehead and prepared to serve. He bounced the ball on his racket, whistled, and noticed Sabrina trying to mix it up on the baseline against her opponent. He shook his head, wondering what she was thinking. Darian had been resting long enough that a ball from another court rolled over to the fence near court 1. Scott walked over, picked it up with his racket, and clumsily followed the slowly bouncing ball toward court 2, where Sabrina was. With a big smile, he asked, "Why would you want to go head-to-head with someone so tough? Run her all over the court for a bit and see if she can keep hitting that hard." Sabrina looked surprised at first, then smiled. He tossed the ball, she caught it on her racket, and thanked him. Scott smiled back and turned toward his court, glancing impatiently at Huxley. He walked closer but made sure Huxley's words could be heard by the crowded bleachers and the spectators standing along the fence. In a calm but firm tone, he said, "Breaks are between sets. It's only 54. Darian glared, started to reply, thought of the crowd, and then slowly walked back to play. Darian had already faced his strong, flat serve, his slice, and his unique spin. Now he received a twist serve with extra spin. The ball bounced up sharply, forcing Darian to hit a high return. It went wide. Darian managed to get back the next serve, but his return lacked power. Scott easily sent it back with a spinning forehand. 400 set point. Darian moved back, ready for the twist serve. Instead, Scott quickly hit a little slice to his backhand and charged to the net. Darian barely returned it before it bounced a second time, but Scott was already there, sending it the other way. Game, set. During the break, Scott stood at the baseline and watched Sabrina skillfully place the ball, making her opponent move from side to side and tricking her with soft shots that would then soar over her. Her energy was starting to fade, and it was getting hotter. While Darian sat on the bench sipping water and wiping his face with a towel, mumbling to himself, Scott bounced around and stood impatiently at the baseline, waiting for his opponent to serve. In the second set, Darian moved from side to side, up and down, until he was wobbling. Scott stopped hitting hard shots. Instead, he played softer but well-placed shots, and Darian was starting to slow down. When he pulled up with a cramp while rushing to the net, Scott took the opportunity to score, chuckling as he looked at Darian. "Come on! Stop playing around and hit the ball!" Everyone in the bleachers heard him, and many phones recorded the match. Scott smiled and returned to his serve. Darian was tired, but ready to keep going. He steadied himself, swaying slightly, prepared to respond to the serve. Scott served the ball hard right at Darian, and was close to the net when Darian's shot hung in the air. Darian had stepped forward, believing he had made a good play, but as Scott prepared to strike, he quickly moved back. The ball came down and hit him unexpectedly, causing him to fall to the court, covering himself with his hands. The crowd gasped together in sympathy, and the men crossed their legs, feeling for Darian. Scott walked over and kindly asked, "Are you okay?" Darian replied sharply, "Leave me alone." Though he was in pain, he still reacted angrily. Acting out like a teenager, he tried to show his frustration by throwing the ball after losing a point or hitting it away to make Scott chase it. He even called time twice when Scott was about to serve, and he walked away from a ball that he had hit into the net, forcing Scott to pick it up. Scott just smiled and shook his head at Darian's behavior. He picked up the balls and continued playing. The crowd appreciated his good sportsmanship, while Darian's actions made them frown upon him. Despite the rough play, Scott easily won the second set, taking the men's singles championship with scores of 64-60. Neither player went to shake hands afterward. Scott gathered his bags and left, taking the match balls and most of Darian's. Sabrina took a bit longer but came back to win her match with scores of 16, 64, 61. They met at the tennis office to take pictures with their trophies, parents, and friends. After placing their trophies in their cars, they awaited the announcement for doubles. There were only 16 teams in doubles, so they had 3 matches planned for the day, and the finals set for 8 in the morning on Sunday. For the mixed doubles, only 12 teams participated, so Scott and Sabrina, Sarah and Cody, and Ken and Melissa all earned first-round byes, needing to win only 2 matches to reach the championship. Ken called Scott and Sabrina to let them know their doubles opponents were ready, and they headed to the courts with their partners. The Tennis Association was managing the tournament for the rest of the day and the next, allowing Ken and Sarah to play, meaning their official responsibilities ended after the singles finals. Ken patted Scott on the shoulder and grinned. "You really played well. That was impressive." "Ha! If we meet them in doubles, you'll get to see me give it my all," Scott replied. "Or at least make him talk in a funny voice forever," Ken said, putting his arm around Scott's shoulder. They laughed as they walked onto the court. "That only happens if we reach the finals, so let's play some doubles to get there," Scott replied. In the first round, they faced 2 young players from San Angelo. Next was a team from Howard Payne University in Brownwood, and the third match was against a team from Trinity University in San Antonio, who had qualified for the national tournament. Despite the strong competition, Ken and Scott won each match in straight sets. They enjoyed the games, joking and trying funny shots along the way. It was all about having fun. The men's doubles finals on Sunday morning would be Carr and Jones against Huxley and Adams. That match would be serious. Meanwhile, Sarah and Sabrina were enjoying themselves too. They knew players from each team they faced and were having success on the court. Their matches were social yet fiercely competitive. Ken suggested they watch the other semifinals. They spent 15 minutes observing each match and were impressed. Sarah and Sabrina would play against Benedict and Adams in the Sunday finals. Benedict and Adams seemed like close friends, while Huxley and Adams seemed more like new acquaintances. Grandpa grilled hamburgers and Nana made potato salad. We need to be there in an hour and it's a 15-minute drive, so let's hurry, Sarah said excitedly. Oh, and our spouses and kids are already there, Ken. Scott had checked out of the bed and breakfast, so he and Ken cleaned up and changed at Ken's house before driving to the River Place in the Jeep. When they arrived, Melissa was waiting at the gate with their little daughter and son, who both rushed to hug Daddy as soon as he got out of the SUV. Scott was met with warm hugs from Nana and a light-hearted scolding from Grandpa Ray, who jokingly told him not to pay for places to stay in his county again. Scott apologized sincerely. Sarah rode with Sabrina, and she received a similar enthusiastic greeting from her kids. She looked stylish, especially for a mom of a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and Cody let her know how much he loved her outfit. Sabrina wore vibrant red shorts that showed off her long legs, and her white tank top highlighted her figure. When she stepped in front of her Jeep, everyone noticed her, and Scott found himself staring. Melissa's teasing voice snapped him back. Girl, didn't I tell you at my birthday party that I never wanted to see you in those shorts again? It's tough for us married ladies to keep our husband's interest when you're dancing around like that. It sounded challenging, but everyone laughed because the two married ladies were just as attractive as the younger woman, depending on whether you liked Sarah's light blonde hair and sporty look, Melissa's strong and curvy figure, or Sabrina's tall and graceful appearance. Scott knew that if they were all single, none of the men would turn down a chance with any of the three. But if he had to choose just one, he could pick easily, and he guessed the husbands could too. People have their favorites. Sabrina smiled at him as she came in, and he felt like hugging her, like the others had. She felt wonderful, smelled amazing, and the gentle kiss she placed on his cheek made him blush. They enjoyed a nice dinner, played with the kids until they were worn out, tucked them into their beds at Nana's house, and then helped Scott unpack at the river cabin. The air conditioning was on, set to 67 degrees. Someone remembered he liked to sleep in a cool room. They each grabbed a beer from the well-stocked fridge and strolled down to the riverbank. The full moon lit up the comfortable chairs along the shore and sparkled on the flowing water. It was still warm 92 degrees, but a light breeze made it nice. They sat and chatted for a while until Ken said it was time to take the kids home and rest. It was already after 10, and the doubles finals were at 8 the next morning. Sabrina looked a little sad, but brightened up when Scott walked back to the house with her. The young parents were busy inside gathering their things when Scott stepped in front of Sabrina, held her hands, and said, "Stop me if you're not okay with this." He leaned in and softly kissed her. She responded with a gentle movement closer to him and kissed back. They heard a clearing of throats a couple of times before realizing they were not alone. "Oh!" Sabrina said, noticing the 4 smiling faces just outside the gate as they both pulled back. "I'd tell you to go get a room," Sarah giggled, "but then you'd miss your games tomorrow. Can you wait until the tournament is over tomorrow evening?" Her words took a moment to register since they were still caught up in the surprise of their first kiss. They both blushed brightly in the moonlight and quickly pulled away from each other as if the other was too hot to touch. Ken couldn't help but laugh at how flustered they were, and soon the others joined in. Once the laughter faded and they helped the kids into their seats, Sabrina and Scott managed to hold hands again. Scott leaned in for a sweet goodbye kiss. Although their first kiss was brief, it was a moment they would think about for the rest of the night. The finals were set to take place in the big stadium, where the largest crowds gathered. The women's match was on Court 1 and the men's on Court 2, with both sets of stands filled with eager tennis fans. People had brought lawn chairs and blankets to watch, making the most of the sunny morning. With local favorites, Sarah, Ken, and Sabrina competing, it was no surprise that their families were sitting right at the front. What surprised him was seeing Scott's parents sitting between the Reichtars and the Jones family by court 1. They hadn't been to a match since his senior year. Normally, they stayed away from crowds, so Scott was curious how they ended up here. He thought about asking them where his dog Duke was since they were supposed to be taking care of him, but instead he just waved and they waved back. His attention shifted when Huxley walked by and jokingly said, "I'm going to beat you again, cuck." This made Scott even more determined. The women's match started first, following a quick warm-up. The 4 players exchanged friendly words and congratulated each other during breaks, showing great sportsmanship while still competing fiercely. When it was time for the men's match, they met at the net after their warm-up. Darian's partner made an effort to introduce himself. Darian just nodded curtly at Ken and ignored Scott. However, when Al Adams shook Scott's hand, he looked directly at him. "I don't know what's going on between you two, but I've warned my partner that if he behaves poorly like we saw in your last match, I won't hesitate to leave the court. Behaving like that doesn't belong on a tennis court, no matter what's happening between players." He turned back to Darian and asked, "Are we all in agreement?" Darian just grumbled something and looked away. Scott smiled and took his place on the court while Ken stepped back to get ready for Darian's first serve. Scott wondered if Al's serious warning was meant for him or Darian. He thought it was probably more about Darian. Who would want to be linked to someone like that? Ken was ready for the serve he expected, a strong shot wide. It was meant to be a great serve, but because Darian was so predictable, Ken easily returned it with a topspin shot that dropped right in front of Darian as he rushed toward the net. Instead of positioning himself correctly, Darian reached down and tried to hit a high lob over Scott, who was close by. It was too soft and not high enough. Scott stepped back, jumped, and prepared to hit the ball down hard at Darian. Realizing his mistake, Darian hunched over, trying to avoid the hit, and shuffled out of the way. Scott's shot went right down the middle, far from Darian, and he turned back toward the baseline. The crowd clapped politely, but Scott heard a few laughs. Darian looked embarrassed and angry as he got ready to serve again. This time, Darian served wide to Scott's backhand with all his strength. He moved closer to the net, believing he had made a great serve, but the ball came off Scott's racket at an angle that surprised everyone. It landed well in the alley, far front of Darian. Off balance, he jumped for the ball and managed to hit it, but Ken was waiting at the net. He quickly struck it into the open space between Huxley and Adams for a point. Adams nodded at Scott, saying, "Nice return." Darian slammed his racket on the court and glared at Scott and Ken. They just smiled back at him. Darian served again, putting all his effort into it, but Ken was ready. He returned it low over the net. Darian reached down awkwardly and sent it over Scott's head. Scott moved back and hit a high lob over Al. It was Darian's turn to chase it, but he just watched as it landed, mumbled something under his breath, and went back to serve again. Ken looked at Scott and winked. Had they already got the better of the big man? The next serve was another strong one, a lob shot over Al, and Darian made a half-hearted attempt to chase it down. The first break of the match happened in that first game, which was not how you want to start a men's doubles match, where breaks usually don't happen often. Scott held his serve at 15, Al served well, and with great skill at the net, then Ken held, thanks to Scott's strong play. Al talked to Darian before serving again, but Darian was too stubborn to take his advice and tried to power the ball past Ken. Ken skillfully returned it across the court toward the alley. Darian managed to take a good shot down the alley that just missed Scott's racket. He felt proud of himself for contributing to the team, even though it was just a standard play. But things went downhill quickly. Ken saw Al too close and hit a return down the alley for a point. Then, Scott sent a strong backhand straight at Darian as he rushed to the net. Darian barely deflected it, sending it right back to Ken, who took advantage and won the point. Darian could feel his face heating up with embarrassment. The next point was intense. Ken served well, followed it to the net, and they had a long rally. Unfortunately, Darian misjudged the play, and Ken ended up scoring again. "Come on!" Darian exclaimed in frustration. "Hey, just relax, it's only 1 point," his teammate Al reminded him. "You need to cover your side of the court better," Al said, taking up his position again. Darian roared as he hit his next serve with all his strength. The powerful serve landed deep in the service box but wasn't placed well. Scott had predicted Darian's serve perfectly and waited just beyond the baseline, positioned for a forehand. The serve was fast, but Scott had faced quicker balls before. When the ball reached him at waist height, Scott hit it with a strong spin, sending it just over the net toward Darian, who was not ready and couldn't get his feet set in time. In a moment of frustration, Darian missed the volley, hitting the net instead. That was too much for him, and he erupted in anger, shouting at everyone around. He focused on Scott, standing close to the net and waving his racket. "You think you're so great, but look what you've done!" he yelled. Al shook his head. "That's it! I can't play with you anymore!" and began to leave the court. Ken shouted, "You're out, Darian! Pack your things and leave this place! You're banned from all the tournaments here!" Darian retorted angrily, "I'll show you what I can do!" "Listen, if you're not gone in 10 seconds, I'll make you regret it," Scott warned calmly. 10 seconds? I don't need that long to deal with you!" Darian shouted and lunged toward the net, swinging his racket. Scott quickly stepped back, narrowly avoiding it. Before he could adjust his racket, Ken stepped forward and knocked it out of Darian's hands. Darian's racket fell to the ground, and Scott raised his hand with 3 fingers bent back. He then lowered another. 6, 5. Darian jumped across the net and swung his fist at Scott's head, but missed by a lot. He was off balance and an easy target. However, Scott just smiled and bounced on his toes, hands ready. He wanted to give Huxley a fair chance, not end things with just one hit. He grinned, knowing that Huxley was about to get a taste of payback. Darian's second punch came while he was still off balance. It was easily blocked by Scott's arm, and Scott hit him with a quick punch to the stomach. Darian froze, and a pained "oof" came from him as he bent over, holding his belly. Scott opened his hands and played around with Darian's face, hitting him once with his left hand and then with his right. Darian's head went back and forth, and blood appeared in his mouth. Before he could recover, Scott hit his left cheek with a closed fist, and then the same on the other side. Huxley looked dazed. For the crowd, Scott shouted, "Had enough?" Then he added, "If you come at me again, I'm going to make it worse for you." That remark seemed to wake Huxley up. He lunged at Scott in a surprise move, but his punch only hit air. Stretched out and off balance, he took a hard punch to the ribs and a jab to the nose when he backed away. Darian was big and tough, and he rushed at Scott, blood streaming from his nose. Scott was smaller, but he was a trained boxer and a good fighter. He stepped aside and tripped Huxley as he stumbled past. Huxley got back up, with scrapes on his arms, cheek, and belly, and recklessly tried again. The outcome was messy, especially for Darian, when Scott finally let him fall to the ground and curl up, moaning in pain. Scott turned away from the injured figure on the court and looked at the quiet crowd. Every eye around courts 1 and 2 was focused on him. He took a deep breath and spoke loudly. "I'm sorry you had to see that none of it belongs on a tennis court, and I apologize for my part. I hope you noticed Ken and Al Adams trying to keep things calm before it got rough, how I tried to avoid a fight, and how I gave him chances to back off. You all witnessed what happened, despite our efforts. Huxley brought his personal issues here today, but it's best not to add more to it. I would appreciate not having to answer questions about this. Thank you." Both local doctors came onto the court and knelt beside the person lying on the ground, curled up. Ken picked up Darian's racket and took it to his bag. The crowd began to buzz and the noise grew louder. Scott put his racket in his bag, picked it up, and turned towards the gate. "Scott, wait!" Sarah called, determined. She was with her partner and both opponents. "I want to check your hands, and they want to talk to you." "I'm fine," he replied without looking at her, but she grabbed his arm, pulled his bag away, checked his hands, and firmly led him to the gate between the courts and across the parking lot with the other 3 women close behind. He struggled to control his feelings, and the last thing he wanted was 4 concerned women around him, but that's what he got. Sarah stood next to him, put her arm around him, held him tight, and said, "Go ahead, Barbara and Amy." Barbara stepped closer, looked him in the eyes, and said, "I regret letting Darian convince me to bring him to this tournament. I'm embarrassed and ashamed of his behavior. Honestly, I wish you had beaten him even more. I was shocked by what he yelled at you and what he said about your wife and Sabrina. He deserved what you gave him. He can find his own way back to Midland. He is not riding with us." Gaining a bit more control, Scott said, "Thank you for saying that. but you have nothing to be ashamed of. From what I saw, you acted wonderfully. As you said, Darian is a terrible person, and he showed that today, but his actions don't reflect on you at all. Amy Adams stepped up beside Barbara and added, "You're being too nice. All three of us, Barbara, Al, and I, had doubts about bringing him, but we let him persuade us. We've already apologized to Sabrina, and no matter what you think, we owe you an apology too. We love this tournament, but I doubt we'll ever have the courage to come back after this. We're really sorry this happened, and we hope you can forgive us for bringing him along." Scott chuckled. He looked down at his sister, and then at Sabrina. "Did I miss something? They seemed very friendly and polite when I saw them. What happened on the court that I didn't see?" Sabrina blinked, looking confused. Sarah pinched his side and said, "Stop that. Just be kind and accept their apologies, even if you think they aren't needed." Sabrina, Barbara, and Amy smiled and joined Sarah in giving him a hug. He let it go longer than usual because they felt nice to be around. Then he finally spoke. Okay, please stop squishing me." He felt a few more pokes before Barbara said, "I would have poked you harder, but I can't find a spot. You don't have any extra weight, just strong muscles." "Hey, if you're going to poke me, I get to poke you back." He started tickling the very ticklish Sarah with one hand and Sabrina with the other. They squealed and squirmed away, laughing. He moved towards Barbara and Amy with his fingers out, and they laughed and ran a few steps. Barbara then stopped and said, "No tickling. If you really want to play, I'm here and ready." She winked at Sabrina. Scott chuckled again and said, "Thanks for making me smile. Nothing brightens my day like being with such wonderful friends. Now I think you two have a game to finish. Let me guide you back to the court, through the gate by the stands. I want everyone to see how amazing you both are, so smile and let your true beauty shine." It was partly sincere, partly playful, but the girls laughed and giggled as they walked with Scott, returning to the court. He walked behind to grab his bag from another court and left through the north gate. He almost reached his car when he heard his dad's voice. He turned to see his parents and Sabrina's parents. "Son, listen, we understand. We have always told you to stay away from conflict, but we fully support you. What happened was too much. Don't worry about the law. The sheriff was right there and arrested Darian after the doctors helped him. They took him to a nearby hospital, but the sheriff said he would be charged with assault once he's released." "Are you okay, honey?" his mom asked, holding his hand. "I mean emotionally. I saw you react to the awful things he said. It must have hurt deeply to have your wife's memory used against you." "I won't pretend it didn't hurt, Mom. I don't think I'll ever get over it because I lost her. And I can't forgive him for what he did, knowing the pain it would cause. I'm trying to move forward. With my friends here, I've been feeling better each day, but now I feel empty again." Doug stepped forward. "Son, this may not be my place, but I want to say something. We don't know you too well yet, but we already think you're great, and our daughter really admires you. Put your bag in your car and come back with us. Watch your friend Sarah and her friend Sabrina play against your new friends, and then go win that mixed doubles championship with our daughter. You are a great person. Don't let someone bring you down." He had been looking into Doug's eyes, and Scott could see how he felt. After Doug finished speaking, Scott glanced at Sabrina's mom and saw love in her eyes too. He nodded, smiled, thanked everyone, and placed his bag in his Jeep. Then he walked back to the bleachers with his mom and Brianna on each side of him. Sarah played to the crowd, joking with herself and Sabrina after a mistake, her bright smile making the moment easier to take. Barbara and Amy were clearly enjoying themselves, even though they were losing badly. Al, however, stood off to the side, looking unhappy. Scott got up and walked over to him. They talked for a bit, and then Al joined him back at the bleachers. They sat together and cheered for the women, applauding every good shot no matter who made it. If anyone thought Al was to blame, it was clear to Scott that he was not at fault. Sabrina and Sarah won the match, hugged their opponents, and the four of them walked off the court together. Mixed doubles was the last event left, and a new partner for Barbara was quickly found. A recently divorced friend of Ken named Charlie volunteered, and the mixed doubles team started right after the championship, runner-up, and consolation awards were given out. Some awards end up in the trash a year later, but the large, medium, and small Yeti coolers they won were real trophies, marked with the Tennis Association logo. Besides Barbara and Charlie, and Sabrina and Scott, the other teams were couples, either married or dating. You could hear real laughter and fun on each court, as each couple tried their best while enjoying the sport and each other. The morning and afternoon passed quickly as the players moved from one match to another, taking only restroom breaks and drinking water. The players in the consolation bracket were having just as much fun as those in the championship bracket, fitting perfectly with the friendly competition vibe of the tournament. As the afternoon went on, they hadn't eaten much, and Ken kept reminding everyone that his family was hosting a barbecue after the tournament, complete with free drinks. The games were fast-paced, but Sarah and Cody went 3 sets before losing to her brother and Melissa. Meanwhile, Sabrina and Scott were waiting for Barbara and Charlie to finish their match against Al and Amy, which also went 3 sets. When that match ended, Sabrina and Scott quickly won against Charlie and Barbara. The finals were next, but it was after 7, they were hungry, and the barbecue was calling. Sabrina and Scott hurried to Court 1, where they waited for the finals to start. Ken and Melissa arrived hand in hand. Melissa announced, "We forfeit! I have blisters and our babysitters need to leave late, so we are ready to party. See you all at the river." She waved her arms to invite everyone around. "If you need directions, Ken will help you. Cell service can be spotty out there, so your maps might not work. Now go get cleaned up, grab a swimsuit or not, and let's go. We have BBQ with all the sides waiting, so just bring yourselves." Scott turned to Sabrina, who smiled and said, "My clothes are in your Jeep. We'll shower at the cabin." A large crowd gathered, but Roy and Grandpa Ray had 2 grills full of brisket and sausage ready, while Anita and Nana had tables full of beans, potato salad, coleslaw, and homemade bread. Folding chairs were available, so everyone grabbed a chair and set it up before going to eat. Sabrina and Scott decided to wait until after the meal to clean up, so they had time to chat with those already there. Most people had seen Scott's earlier struggle with Huxley, but no one mentioned it, respecting his wishes. They were wondering if the Midland group was coming when Al's car pulled up. "You almost missed the meal!" a man shouted, and both women pointed at Al. "Looks like someone doesn't know how to follow directions," Amy said loudly. Al hung his head in a playful way, but then tried to blame his passengers, who quickly defended themselves. After skipping meals all day to speed things up, the 24 players from the open division and the 12 from other age groups were very hungry. They did a great job of eating a lot of the tasty food and drinking cold beer, but they didn't finish everything. Plastic bags and food containers came out as the hosts packed away the leftovers. Meanwhile, the guests helped clean up, putting the tables and chairs back in the storeroom. Once everything was tidy, the older folks made their excuses and went inside to relax with a drink and chat a bit longer. When they had left, Ken called for the men to grab the coolers full of beer and carry them to the riverbank. Sarah asked the women to take down some lawn chairs or blankets and set up in the grass by the rocks. Melissa went ahead to guide everyone on where to set up, then took out her iPad. She arranged 2 small speakers on the rocks and started playing her music. The playlist was a mix of country, rock, and slow romantic songs that suited the moment well. Some couples placed their chairs close together, while others spread blankets out on the grass. The most organized ones, like Melissa, Sarah, and Sabrina, laid out blankets and cozy sleeping bags. Some couples began to whisper and share gentle moments, but most just chatted and enjoyed their cold drinks. The bright gibbous moon shone over the river and the people beside it. Scott was captivated by the soft light shining on Sabrina and her beautiful smile. He couldn't focus on anything else, enchanted by how she had opened up to him in just 3 days. Sabrina was deep in conversation with Al, Amy, Barbara, and Charlie nearby, unaware that Scott was watching her. Barbara noticed and winked at Sabrina, nodding toward Scott. Sabrina turned slightly, becoming more comfortable, and caught the amazed look on Scott's face from the corner of her eye. Amy was talking about their tennis club, giving Sabrina the chance to sneak glances at Scott while still listening. That first kiss had felt dramatic to her, but their talk since had been friendly, as if nothing special had happened. However, the look Scott was giving her now was not just friendly. It reminded her of the way her dad looked at her mom, or how her grandfather gazed at a photo of his late wife. Without saying anything, Sabrina moved again, shifting to a spot directly in front of him. She settled against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, resting his hands gently on her forearms. She rested her head on his shoulder, letting out a quiet sigh. He gently placed his hands on either side of her waist, and she moved her own hands to meet his, guiding them toward the center of her stomach. Though his hands were a bit sweaty, she found comfort in the warmth and closeness. A small thought crossed her mind. It was unusual for her to feel at ease like this, especially after a long, sweaty day, but somehow it felt different this time. As they stayed close, the warmth between them grew stronger, and they both felt the connection deepening. The simple contact seemed to spark a sense of intimacy, which only brought them closer. The group nearby had stopped talking and noticed the quiet moment they were sharing, though no one said anything. "All right, enough chit-chat," someone called out. "I've been out here all day and the river is calling. Just a heads up, Ken and I are pretty relaxed when we swim at night, so if you're shy, look away." Ken added with a laugh, "And if you're not in the water in 5 minutes, we'll come and get you no matter what you're wearing. Oh, and by the way, what happens at the river stays at the river," the group responded in unison. Scott watched in surprise as Ken and his wife quickly made their way to the river. The light of the moon reflected on the water as they dove in, clearly comfortable with themselves. Scott was amazed by how carefree they seemed. Meanwhile, Amy, Al, Barbara, and Charlie had joined in the fun. People all around them were getting ready to jump into the river too, including Sabrina, who tossed her skirt towards Scott with a playful smile. "You better hurry," she teased, pulling off her shirt. "If you don't get in soon, we're all going to come and bring you in ourselves. It's the rule of the game." Scott looked a bit confused, but soon Amy and Al got up and began heading toward the water as well. Barbara watched for a moment before shrugging and joining in, leaving her outer layer behind. Before Scott could react, he realized everyone was heading to the water. With laughter and a sense of excitement in the air, the group was ready to enjoy the night by the river, leaving behind the day's worries. He slowly revealed her midsection, then her hips, and finally the soft skin of her legs as he gently lowered her shorts to her ankles. She kicked them away, and he raised his eyes, taking in every detail, admiring her beauty from her feet all the way up to her face. The playful look on her face had changed to something more serious as they locked eyes, both feeling a deep connection in the moment. She softly whispered his name as his hands slid up her legs and over her back, drawing them closer together. Around them, the group had paused in their rush to get into the water. Some were still in various stages of undressing, while others stood by, watching the quiet exchange between the two on the hill. "That's such a beautiful moment," Melissa whispered to Ken as they observed from a distance, while others around them shared quiet smiles and whispered comments about what they were seeing. Sabrina's head was tilted back, and they held each other close, feeling the energy between them. She shuddered slightly, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. Then, just as suddenly, he pulled away, leaving her a little surprised. She looked down and saw him getting rid of his shoes and clothes, quickly joining the group in their playful rush toward the water. In a swift move, he scooped her up and carried her into the river, setting her down gently when they were both chest-deep in the cool water. Laughter and applause broke out among the others, with light-hearted comments flying about, but the two of them seemed focused only on each other. For a few long seconds, they gazed into each other's eyes, their surroundings fading into the background. Then, Sabrina reached out, placed her hand behind his head, and pulled him in for a soft, meaningful kiss, sealing the moment between them. The kiss they shared made everything quiet again, and other couples held each other closely as they watched. Barbara moved playfully in Charlie's arms and said, "Charlie, I don't usually rush into things, but I think tonight will be special." "I'll send flowers to Scott and Sabrina tomorrow," he replied softly. "I think many will." Scott slowly pulled away from the kiss. He was so close to her and said, "Will you spend the night with me?" "My things are at the cabin. I plan to stay, and our parents know that. I wasn't sure if you were going to ask, so I thought I would take the lead. You're with me tonight." "Tonight?" he asked, still gazing into her eyes. "Maybe longer. We'll see how the night goes." Scott's phone rang the next morning around 11:30 a.m. He was still waking up but managed to say hello. He recognized Sabrina's mom's voice, which quickly brought him to attention. "Are you two going to sleep all day?" she asked. "We're ready for lunch and you still haven't finished the work you promised. When will you get that done?" Sabrina heard her mom's voice and panicked. She quickly searched for something to cover up, thinking her mom might somehow see her through the phone. The sheet she needed was on the floor, a little messy from the night before. Scott watched as she bent down to grab the sheet, and he couldn't help but playfully tap her. She yelped in surprise. "I'm afraid it might take me a day or two to finish that work. I'm focused on something else right now, and it's a bit tiring. Maybe tomorrow?" he said. She laughed, but then Scott's mom took the phone. "You listen to your mother. We expect you to meet us at the cafe in an hour. If you don't, we'll come to get you." He heard Doug's voice in the background. "And my daughter better be okay. I found out your trouble from yesterday." Then there was laughter, and the call ended. Sabrina started to calm down, though her face was still red. He grabbed the sheet from her hand, revealing her, and stared for a moment before saying, "They said we have an hour." She shrieked, jumped up, and ran to the bathroom, locking the door. He shook the handle and told her to let him in. She replied, "No way. They'll come out here in an hour and a half and find me in the shower." "I get it now," he said sincerely. "But honey, I need to shower too. We can save water and—" "Ha! We'll use double the water. Go wash in the river you promised me last night that it's clean." He began tidying up the room, making the bed, taking clothes out of their bags and laying them out. Sabrina, wrapped in a towel, carefully opened the bathroom door, saw him on their bed, and hurried into the other bedroom. She held the door a little open and said, "You can take your shower now." Still without clothes, he casually walked toward the bathroom but suddenly changed direction toward the bedroom door she was holding. She squealed and tried to close it, but he was too strong. The struggle made her towel fall to the floor. She gasped, trying to pick it up with one hand while holding the door with the other. But he slipped past the door and reached for her. She felt vulnerable, and she knew he was too strong to resist. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. She could feel the warmth of his body against her. At that moment, she forgot everything else. Just as she was starting to feel overwhelmed, he suddenly pulled back and said, "I guess we better get ready." "No," she exclaimed. "I don't care anymore. Let's go back to bed or do something fun. I want to be with you." He jumped back and ran into the bathroom, locking the door. She heard the shower start, so she squeezed her way into the kitchen using paper towels to clean herself up. She wondered if she should have brought something to manage it, but she didn't have any with her, so she wiped herself dry and returned to the bedroom. Her sweet Scotty had laid out some clothes for her. She rolled her eyes and started laughing. If she wore that to the cafe, her dad would not be happy, even though she had a teaching job and a place lined up for the new school year. She found a short but more suitable skirt and blouse to wear over the pretty underwear she had packed while trying to impress Scott. As it turned out, the best choice was no clothes at all. "I need to send flowers to Melissa and Ken after we eat lunch." Scott pretended to be disappointed that Sabrina wasn't wearing the outfit he picked out for her, but she promised to wear it when they got back to the cabin, which made him feel better. He wore nice shorts with a belt and a polo shirt that matched her blouse. She thought it looked good, though she felt a bit silly having such thoughts like an older person. Still, he looked nice, and they went well together. Scott ordered a special front bench seat for his Jeep because he didn't use the space between the seats for anything useful. He preferred to keep his briefcase and gadgets close when they traveled. He hadn't expected Sabrina to sit so close to him, but he liked it, especially when she rested her hand on his leg while he drove the 12 miles to town. Their parents had a table by the big windows looking out at the square. They smiled when the Jeep parked right in front. The lunch rush was over, so there was plenty of room and privacy. This was good because the parents were giving them curious looks before they could sit down. Doug couldn't help starting the conversation. "Honey, are you okay? You look tired, like you haven't been getting enough sleep." Sabrina knew what he was doing, but still felt embarrassed, thinking about why she looked sleepy. She looked down and began to answer. "Daddy, it's not nice to say your daughter looks tired." She didn't get to finish because all 4 parents started laughing. The waitress chose that moment to come and take their order, which only made things worse. Sabrina was blushing and the waitress asked, "Are you all right, dear?" This made everyone laugh again, only stopping when Scott said, "We haven't seen a menu yet. Please give us a moment." "There are menus on the table. Take a look and I'll be right back," she replied before hurrying off. Brianna reached across the table, patted her daughter on the shoulder and said, "It's okay, sweetie. We know all about the gathering last night. We'll let you have a moment to order. But we might start teasing you again soon. The teasing stopped during lunch, as there were many other things to discuss while the two families got to know each other. As they were finishing, Sabrina quietly asked her mother, "What did you mean when you said, 'We know all about the gathering'? There were only a few of us that stayed after the barbecue and—" The table went quiet, and the other three smiling parents looked at Brianna. "Well, honey, this morning the van from the flower shop came to the house and delivered 3 vases and 2 potted plants to the door. I was really surprised when I saw that all the letters were for you and Scott, coming from other couples. So I called Sarah to find out more. She sounded a little sleepy, but I told her about the letters and how we couldn't reach you on your cell. I heard her laugh, then Cody said, 'We need to send some too, they started a fun night.' I asked her what he meant, and she giggled again like a young girl. She said, 'Mama Bree, you probably don't want to know, but if you do, ask your daughter what happens on the river stays on the river.' Then they both laughed and hung up. So, sweet baby, what happened on the river that made you and Scott get all those flowers?" Sabrina looked straight at her and said, "Sarah was right twice. What happens on the river stays on the river, and you probably don't want to know anyway. Now, can I use your phone? I need to order flowers for Melissa and Ken, and mine is charging in the Jeep. It's about to die." Brianna seemed puzzled, but handed her phone to her daughter. Doug shot Scott a look, but Scott just smiled and said, "What happens?" before the others joined in with laughter. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the shop where Scott checked the computer systems. He then started the programs to clear out any unwanted software from the shop's PC and laptop. Next, he planned to run deeper diagnostics to find hidden issues. He asked them to take him to their home to scan their laptops and tablets. After he warned her parents, Sabrina wanted to include her own devices. As soon as they got to the house, Sabrina guided Scott to the back porch for a happy reunion with Duke, his dog, who greeted him with excitement and affection. While Scott worked, she checked out all the flowers and potted plants, then took her charged phone to her room. She came back 20 minutes later with a big smile and said, "If you like leftovers and drinks, we're all invited to the river place. Grandpa Ray and Papa Roy have more food than they can handle. Oh, and bring your swimwear. After we eat, we're going tubing." "Sabrina, dear, did you say swimwear? I didn't think it was necessary by the river." With a cheeky grin, Sabrina replied, "Mommy, dearest, you can go however you like if you want to. I'm sure the guys at the store will love it when we park our tubes there at the bridge." Scott's mom, Helen, laughed and covered her mouth, then said, "Bree, darling, I think I'll let you handle that on your own. I'm not sure how much longer I could keep away from all those boys." Now it was Bree's turn, but Doug and Dan stopped it by saying they thought being carefree was a good idea. They promised to look after their darling wives if any men tried to bother them. Scott and Sabrina had their swimsuits ready at the river cabin, so they hopped in the Jeep and drove off. Everyone waved as they passed the house, and Ken called out, "Ready to eat in 30 minutes, don't be late." Sabrina smiled and said, "That's your reminder you know him too well." Scott wanted to have a fun moment with her, but he let her go into the other room to get ready. He put on his new swim trunks that were shorter than usual and waited. Sabrina was back quickly, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a light dress and flip-flops. "Can I see what's underneath all those layers?" he joked. "No, it's a surprise. Let's go, they're waiting for us." They walked up to the main house and joined everyone who sat under the shady trees near the grill. The men had cooked more sausages and warmed the brisket and beans. The women prepared fresh potato salad and coleslaw and filled the coolers with drinks. The brisket tasted wonderful after being cooked slowly over the flames, and the smoked sausage got great reviews. "This is my special recipe," Grandpa Ray said proudly. "I mix the seasonings and tell the processors how to make it. I used to do it myself, but the team at the plant does a great job now." After a delicious meal and a tasty dessert of apple or blackberry cobbler, it was time to clean up and enjoy the river. It would get dark in about 3.5 hours, and it took 2 hours to reach Castell Bridge with the current. The women took off their light dresses and set them on the rocks. The men removed their shirts and looked on. Scott and Ken were standing close by when the women revealed their swimsuits. Ken remarked, "Wow, I've never seen your mom or Bree's mom in a swimsuit before, but they look great." Scott playfully hit him on the arm and said, "Well, you could say Anita looks great too." Ken playfully hit him back and pointed at the younger women. Seriously, I don't mean anything weird, but you have to agree that those three look amazing. I'd be interested if one wasn't my sister. So, one's your sister and one's your wife. Does that mean you're interested in my girlfriend? We might be able to sort something out as long as I can have your sister, your wife, and your mom. Cody showed up just in time to catch their banter. He interrupted. I want to join in, but I want to have some fun with Ken's wife and mother, Scott's girlfriend and her mother, and Scott's mom too. Well, then I want your wife, your mom, and your sister, came the reply. Come on, that's not cool, they all called out, teasing each other and laughing before grabbing tubes for themselves and the women in their lives. If you see something unusual above my tube, don't worry about it, Scott told Sabrina, trying to be serious. She thought for a moment, then got the joke. She chuckled. So, you like my new bikini, huh? Oh, absolutely. I never knew a small, bright yellow suit could look so good on your tanned skin, and I'm sure the guys at Castell will like it too. Sarah, Melissa, and I are thinking about going up to have a drink with them. Are you coming with me? He sighed dramatically. Why didn't you tell me before we left? I could have brought my gear. Gear? That won't help much with all their fancy equipment, she said with a laugh. Looks like you're on your own then, he replied, pushing her tube into the current. It sent her in one direction while he found another flow nearby. He noticed her watching him with a worried look on her face. She found it hard to get out of the rushing water until she finally spotted an eddy a bit downstream. She waited there for him. As he swam closer, she paddled over to grab his tube. I'm sorry, I should have talked to you first. I won't go with them. He pretended to be indifferent. That's up to you. If you want to hang out with someone else, that's your choice. Worried, she quickly explained. We were just reminiscing about how we used to pose and play around when we floated in the tubes or kayaks to tease the folks who watched us from the cliffs. Some even brought binoculars. Sarah suggested we get a drink since we're old enough, and Melissa agreed because she loves to joke around and Ken lets her. I just went along with it, but now that I know how you feel, I'll say no. His playful disapproval faded into a small smile. She didn't yet realize when he was joking. The older group had moved ahead, while the younger ones waited under a big cottonwood for shade, avoiding the current. When they arrived, Sabrina quickly stated, I've changed my mind. I won't go up to the bar with you. Sarah looked at Scott, noticing his grin, and said, You're playing tricks. She doesn't know you like we do. What did you tell her? Not much, he replied with a casual shrug. I told her it was fine if she wanted to show off to the guys, but I wasn't going to get in trouble for her. Sarah and Melissa moved closer and started splashing water at him. Stop it, you troublemaker! Sarah shouted. Melissa tried to flip his tube, but he quickly turned hers and sent her tumbling. She came up sputtering and splashing water back at him before swimming back to her tube and holding on tight. Sabrina looked a bit lost. Ken said he would trade full beers for empty cans before they started again, happily making the swaps while smiling at Sabrina's confusion. He waved her over, took her empty can, and gave her a new one. He's just joking with you, sweetheart, he assured her with his usual playful grin. He'll sit here with us, watch you three walk up to the bar in your swimsuits, and we'll all have a laugh about it. Scott is one of my good friends, but he can be a bit annoying when he teases the girls. Just give him some back and see what happens. Sabrina took 2 beers, paddled over to Scott, who was keeping just out of Melissa's splash zone, and held up the unopened can. Here's a cold beer, but you have to throw the empty to Ken. He crumpled the empty can and tossed it to his buddy, who caught it and put it in the ice chest. Sabrina moved close to Scott, holding his beer with one hand and her own with her knees. When he reached for it, she pushed down on his tube. Since he was already leaning that way, the tube tipped, and he fell out. Her plan was clever, except he landed on her tube. All she could see was his mischievous grin before her face hit the water and she struggled to come up without dropping both beers. Melissa was on the shore, getting ready to jump back into her tube, and Ken was there to steady it. Cody and Sarah floated nearby, laughing at Scott and Sabrina's tumble, and at how Sabrina was thrashing around before she realized the water was only knee-deep. Scott disappeared under the surface, and Sarah's laughter turned into loud screams as she tried to escape what she knew was happening. Hands shot up from the water, grabbed her ankles, and she was thrown out of her tube, screaming. Cody figured he was next, so he flipped his tube over, gathered his and his wife's, and pulled them to the shore. Scott swam out to get their lost tubes and brought them back to shore, where Sabrina waited with their beers and a teasing frown that couldn't hide her excitement. When he got close enough, he grinned and reached for the unopened beer. "You think flipping me over means I'll still give you a beer? No way." "Hey, you flipped me over. I just fell on top of you, so you tipped over." She laughed and offered him the can. He said, "Let's get into the tubes first, I don't want to spill." He threw their tubes on the shore and began to climb out. Melissa was in the shallow water next to him, seeming to get ready to enter her tube. When he got close enough, she jumped over and pulled his shorts down to his knees. For the second time in a day, he was exposed. But this time, he was the only one. He paused for a moment, but then took a step back and turned to face her. She was pointing and laughing, and so were Sarah, Cody, and Sabrina. Suddenly, he found himself in an awkward position. Ken noticed the amused look on his friend's face and shouted, "Oh, no!" Scott stepped toward Melissa and said, "If you didn't get a good look last night, you just had to ask. But if I'm exposed, so are you." He playfully moved around, making her gasp. She quickly waded towards her husband, who was laughing. She wasn't fast enough. Scott dove forward in the shallow water, grabbed her bikini, and pulled it down to her ankles. When he cleared the water from his eyes, she was bent over trying to pull her bottoms back up, and he couldn't help but notice her position. He pushed himself up and playfully tapped her side. She squealed again and stepped back, leaving her bikini in the water. He lunged again, but she stepped back, turned around, and flopped down on Ken's lap, saying, "Help me." The noise from the laughter and shrieks echoed a long way down the stream where others were enjoying their time. Scott picked up Melissa's bikini and tossed it on his tube. Instead of pulling up his shorts, he took them off and dove towards Sarah. She flailed, shouting, "No, no, no!" But it didn't stop him. He came up from below, flipped her tube, and pulled her small bikini down her legs while she was trying to get back to the surface. He tossed her suit next to his and turned to Sabrina. She stopped laughing at the others, cried out, and started hurrying toward a rocky ledge. She moved fast, but he was even quicker. He pulled her back into the deeper water, and her yellow bikini bottom floated off, joining the others. When she came up, sputtering without her bikini bottom, she yelled, "Help me get him!" The three women approached him from different directions. He pretended to move toward Melissa, but tried to sneak between Sabrina and Sarah, who quickly caught on. Sarah jumped onto him from one side, Sabrina from the other, pushing him under the water. Melissa joined in and gave him a light smack on the back when he surfaced. "Payback!" She laughed. They didn't notice how easily he let himself sink deeper, too caught up in their laughter, until Sarah suddenly screamed and tried to move away. "He pinched me!" she yelled. Melissa turned to run but stumbled forward, yelping, "He pinched me too! That hurt!" Sabrina had started to back away, but after Sarah's warning, she suddenly squealed and fell into the water. She came up gasping, then was pulled back under again as if something had grabbed her legs. When she resurfaced, looking a bit out of it, Ken started laughing. "I don't think he's pinching her. Should we give them some space or should we join in?" Instead of answering, Melissa pulled him into the water, wrapping her arms around him. Cody followed by pulling Sarah into the deeper part. Swimwear flew through the air, scattering around the area. For the next little while, the only sounds were the water rushing over the rocks and a few quiet exchanges of laughter and affection. Once everything was back in place, they passed out fresh drinks. "I feel a bit silly sending more flowers to that guy," Cody muttered to Ken, who chuckled in agreement. Their friends, still looking a bit dreamy, nodded. Sarah added, "He's kind of a jerk, but he sure knows how to get things going. I feel sorry that Sabrina got paired with him, though. Can you imagine being with someone like that forever?" Sabrina, meanwhile, sat contently with Scott, completely lost in her own thoughts, not paying attention to the conversation. Melissa watched Sarah to see how she would react to the comment. Then she said, "I don't think she minds much, Sarah." They floated in 3 tubes, towing 4 others, including the one filled with drinks, until they reached the last corner before the bridge where their parents waited. The women climbed out of their tubes, adjusted their swimsuits, walked to the shallow water, and got back in their own tubes. They joined hands with their partners to continue floating together. The adults sat on rocks on the north side of the bridge. When the younger ones approached, Brianna stood up, put her hands on her hips, and teased in a strong Texas accent. What on earth happened to you? We've been waiting for over half an hour. We heard you shouting and then it was quiet. Before anyone could reply, Scott chimed in. Mama Bree, why does your accent get thicker when you're trying to embarrass your daughter? Laughter erupted on the shore, and even Brianna couldn't help but chuckle. Once the laughter died down, she tried again, this time without the accent. All right, Mr. Smarty Pants, what were you all doing? He looked at the others, counted down from 3 with his fingers, and they shouted, What happens at the river stays at the river! Then he added, And you really don't want to know anyway. The rocks where the parents sat were the best spot to get out, so they waded ashore with their tubes. Once on the rocks, Ken said, We can walk across the bridge and back to where we left the trucks, or we can bring the trucks here while the ladies dry off and go get some cold drinks from the store. What do you prefer? Scott spoke up first. Their fans are already waiting along the rail. I'd hate to let them down. Does anyone have money? Casually, the women glanced toward the rail. Sarah shook her wet hair, placed a hand on her hip, and said, We need to put on a little show first, boys. Just ignore us while we have some fun. Sabrina looked at Scott with curiosity. He winked and shrugged, causing her to grin. She let her hair down, swirled it around, turned away from the cliff, straightened her legs, and bent to grab a towel. This drew excitement from their onlookers, inspiring Melissa to do the same. The excitement grew. Brianna turned to the other women and said, There are some older gentlemen up there who will appreciate us. Let's show them what we've got, ladies. Their husbands enjoyed the playful display, but Scott and Ken were surprised by their mothers behaving this way, even though they had to admit, if they weren't their moms. After several minutes of giggling and playful poses, the 6 women slipped on their flip-flops and headed toward the bridge. Here's some money for the drinks, dear, Doug said. Brianna waved the money away, surprised. Do you really think we can't get those guys to buy us drinks? That's just silly. The men relaxed with fresh cans from the coolers and watched as the colorful group of women strolled over the bridge and up the hill toward the outdoor drink stand. Sabrina in bright yellow, Salah in bright blue, and Melissa in hot pink walked side by side, followed by Brianna in a red swimsuit, Anita in a snug black suit, and Helen in a fitted outfit that caught Scott's eye a bit more than he wanted. As they reached the deck, more men came out from the store and watched them. When they arrived, the crowd parted, and the older women led the way to the bar. Sabrina later confessed that the closer they got, the more nervous she and the other girls felt, but the confident moms pushed ahead and guided them through the crowd. Once at the bar, with everyone looking at them, Brianna exclaimed with a playful southern accent, "Oh, no, I forgot my purse. Do any of you girls have some money to get us a drink?" Not long after, several men stepped up to help, offering to pay more than once. They stood with their backs to the bar, enjoyed their drinks, and chatted with their captivated listeners. A group of hard-working men came over the bridge, saw the scene, and parked their truck nearby. They quickly made their way to the busy deck. While the men were on their next round, Doug admitted, "My wife loves to flirt. She can't help it, and she's really good at it. I should know she uses her charms on me, and I give her whatever she wants." "Scott, you better watch out. Sabrina has her mother's skills. Oh, she's already got me wrapped around her finger, and she barely knows me. Watching her in action is truly eye-opening. I didn't realize that all her little gestures and playful moves were part of her style. I thought they were just things she does that I find cute. She may not have reached her mother's level yet, but she's pretty impressive already. The guy who ends up with her is going to need sharp judgment and a lot of willpower if he hopes to have any say." Doug, do you ever let Brianna loose in a busy place just to give her a chance to unwind or maybe to have a little fun? I've seen Dad take Mom to dances, and she dances with everyone there. Then they don't come out of their room for days. Are you two like that? Roy chimed in. Well, there's no better way to connect. If we wait an hour to pick them up, we'll all need to rush home. I don't want to say this in front of her son, but Anita doesn't handle her drinks well, and I have to watch her if she has more than 4 beers or 3 mixed drinks. She sometimes wanders off. Dan laughed. Helen is tiny and she loves her tequila. I have to keep an eye on her when we're out. Scott looked at Ken, who said, "This is too much information, Dad. It's one thing to think about you two together, but even worse to picture Mom with someone random." Doug leaned over and put a hand on Ken's shoulder. "Son, When you marry a beautiful woman, you have to consider some things. They've made choices throughout their lives, but as they get older, they need more compliments, and not just from their husbands. Just let her be charming sometimes, but always keep an eye on her. With how the world is, you have to watch out for anyone trying to take advantage, so stay alert. What about those guys over there? They seem a bit suspicious, Scott commented. Roy laughed. Not a problem. They're mostly good folks, and there are too many of them for a few troublemakers to risk anything. They would face the consequences. They continued sharing thoughts about women, giving the ladies more time to enjoy their drinks and socialize. As it got darker, Roy and Doug went to get their trucks. When they returned, they loaded up the tubes and coolers into Roy's truck while the three boys jumped into the back of Doug's truck. They drove carefully to the general store and stopped near the deck. Ken stood up, saw the women watching, and yelled, "Are you all ready to go?" The group of men booed and shouted, "No!" The ladies clinked their bottles, finished their drinks, and started saying their goodbyes. Just before leaving, Brianna asked, "Girls, do we want one more before we go?" They all agreed that one last drink would be nice, so Brianna asked the bartender if they had any credit left. He laughed and said he had sold so much beer today that he would buy their next round if they promised to come back again. They jumped up and down, laughing and celebrating while he served their drinks, and then they lined up to head to the trucks, moving with a playful bounce. A lot of eyes watched them as they walked down and climbed in, with cheers and playful sounds from the crowd. The younger women joined their guys in the back, while the older women sat in the front with their husbands. Before they settled in, Sarah, Sabrina, and Melissa turned to the crowd and said, "Thanks, everyone. We had a great time." The beers were meant for their guys, but it didn't seem like anyone was really thirsty. The heads in the trucks were close together. In the back, laughter filled the air, hands were playful, and excitement grew before they disappeared from view. The older guys had done well. Their energy stirred something in the women nearby, and it was hard for the men to resist such strong feelings. The younger couples quickly dropped off their supplies at the river cabin and hurried away without much of a goodbye. For a moment, Scott thought about how the evening would go with two couples at the Reichtars, but Sabrina was determined to keep his attention solely on her. The other couples said quick goodbyes and left in a rush. Once they were gone, Sabrina stepped aside and said, "I need to change out of this wet swimsuit." She then began to untie her top. Soon her swimsuit was on the ground and she stood there, a shining figure under the moonlight. Scott couldn't take his eyes off her. She moved gracefully, giving him the best view, even striking a pose she knew he found captivating. Tuesday was a usual workday, but the crew arrived and opened the shop without the owners. The crew chief grinned as he read a funny text he received earlier, and everyone shared a laugh afterward. "The boss has it better than I do," one joked. "If I had that at home, I wouldn't come to work but once a week." "Ha!" another replied. "After 2 days, you'd be hiding in the lounge trying to get some rest." Scott and Sabrina arrived a bit later, carrying boxes of donuts, muffins, and pastries. As expected, the 22 workers had gathered in the lounge and office for their coffee break. They enjoyed the treats, but they were also distracted by Sabrina's white shorts and her red blouse that showed a bit of her midriff. She seemed entirely unaware of the attention she was getting as she set out the snacks and cheerfully invited everyone to enjoy. Wandering to the refrigerator, she got bottles of water for herself and Scott, saying, "Mom and Dad will arrive later," before she led him into the office. "You're being a bit thoughtless," he teased when the door closed. "What do you mean?" she asked with a playful smile. "I thought it was kind to bring treats for their break. In those sandals and shorts that show so much leg." "That was certainly kind," he replied. "But I worry they might lose focus while thinking about you." "Oh, come on! It's really warm outside." They wore jeans and long-sleeve shirts to protect their arms and legs. Even when they weren't in the shop, they dressed the same way, as did their wives. "And do their wives look like you?" he asked with a teasing smile. She laughed softly. "Well, they're used to it. Mom bothers them every day, so I have to take her place when she's not here." He raised an eyebrow and said, "If we keep spending time together, we're going to need to talk about some ground rules, Missy." Before she could respond, he sat down and began checking the results from the shop's computer diagnostics, the Wi-Fi network, and the internet connection. It's not as bad as I expected, but it's still not great, he muttered, printing out the results. When do you think your parents will be back? He asked. I have no clue. This is pretty unusual for them. All right. I'll bring in my laptop and work on a project for my job after I fix this issue for your parents. Sounds good. Melissa just texted me, and the new elementary principal is at the school right now. I'm going to head over, get my room assignment, and see what supplies I'll need. Okay, see you later, he replied, focusing on his laptop. A moment later, she came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders in a warm hug. He smiled and patted her leg gently. I thought you were heading to the school, he murmured, enjoying the affection. She giggled and gave him a playful bite on his neck, then slipped onto his lap. He chuckled, holding her close, and gave her a soft kiss on her forehead. Go on now, he said with a grin. Don't start something you're not ready to finish. She laughed again, kissed him on the cheek, and said, I'm going. See you in a bit. She hopped off his lap and headed out the door, leaving him smiling as he turned back to his work. He knocked on the door and she jumped, quickly adjusting her clothes and hair. She stepped away from him and moved toward the door just as Scott tucked his chair in and focused on his laptop. Their parents walked in. Mom sniffed the air, using a playful tone, and asked, What have you two been up to? It smells a bit strange in here. Sabrina quickly replied, Scott has been fixing some issues on the computers, and I'm about to head to school to meet Melissa. We need to see the new principal and get my room assignment. Without skipping a beat, her dad chimed in, Is the new principal a woman? Because if it's a man, you might want to freshen up and change into something less, revealing. Sabrina felt embarrassed. She hadn't thought about dressing more appropriately for a quick school visit since she was used to the relaxed rules at college. She promised to do better and rushed out. Scott looked at the smiling faces and tried to change the topic. Where have you all been? Do older folks really need to nap until noon after some fun? Ignoring his tease, Doug asked, So what did you find? Scott handed him a printout and explained, Nothing too alarming, I've seen worse. The program found some malicious software, mostly spyware, including a few that I'd like to discuss later. I also found a virus that might have caused slow performance, along with an inactive ransomware virus that could have been a serious problem. You really should have a class on computer safety for everyone who uses your computers, especially about being careful with emails containing links. The parents had been standing but took seats when Doug motioned for them to sit. Would you be willing to teach that class, Scott? I'm not sure who else could help. I have to go back to Austin tomorrow morning for a regular online meeting, and I need a good internet connection for that. I could come back on Thursday or another day if it suits you better, but we need to act fast. Someone clicked on links that caused these problems, and that must stop right away. The parents shared concerned glances. About that, Doug said. You don't need to go into the office in Austin, do you? Your work is online? Scott nodded. So, in Austin, you have your apartment with good internet, a gym membership, and you play tennis. Other than that, you have no major ties, right? Scott agreed, leaning back in his chair, curious about where this conversation was headed. Your dad and I visited my bank earlier today. The president recently retired, and the vice president became the new president, creating a need for a vice president. Your dad, who has a lot of experience working at a bank, and your mom have been thinking about moving away from Houston. The president mentioned he could give Dan a 10% pay raise and cover moving costs if he could start in mid-September. At the same time, the local school had a late resignation and urgently needed a high school English and speech teacher. Bree and your mom went to see the superintendent with a resume. He looked it over and said he had never seen a better candidate. He offered her a $1,000 signing bonus to accept the job. We're going to take the afternoon off to look at houses with Ken's mother-in-law, our favorite real estate agent. Scott sat there in shock, wondering what was happening. His parents were traveling to Austin to take care of their house and dog while he was busy with a tournament, and just 4 days later, they were moving from the woodlands to a small town in the hill country? His parents exchanged smiles, amused by his surprise. His mom then said, We know you have your own plans, honey, but would you like to come with us to check out some houses? We found a few that seem like a good fit, including one near Doug and Brianna that looks perfect. There's also a larger property with 10 acres that sounds interesting. It's only 3 years old, located at the edge of town. It features a fenced yard with a swimming pool, a small barn, a workshop, and even a tennis court. The couple who built it moved to Connecticut last year to be closer to their family, and they want to sell it quickly. A family with a dog that enjoys swimming and playing tennis might really like it. Maybe not us, since we don't have a dog or play tennis, but someone else might find it perfect. If Scott had any doubts about his mom's intentions, the smile on her face made it clear. He began to speak, but his dad jumped in first. "Oh, and we found out the local phone coop provides high-speed fiber internet up to 1 gig throughout the town. Verizon even offers up to T4 connections if needed. Isn't that amazing for such a small place?" Brianna added, "Yes, we're very lucky. Many families have moved here to work from home since COVID. They enjoy great salaries while living in their dream town, and their kids love the schools, which have won many awards for excellence. We're really happy that Sabrina will be teaching here." Scott noticed that she spoke without a thick accent during her entire explanation. Then Doug spoke up. "While we were at the bank, we mentioned you're an expert in computer security, and that you're helping us with our home and business computers. The new president mentioned he would like to speak with you. He wants to offer more online services, but is worried about keeping them safe. He asked if you would consider being a consultant, and he said several business owners are also looking for help." Dad spoke again. "We told him you are already working 32 hours a week in Austin, but you might be open to it if the hours are reasonable. What do you think?" Scott stared at the ceiling. "What do I think? I feel like everyone is pushing me. What are you four planning?" Sabrina met them for a late lunch at a Mexican restaurant. She wore a white blouse and a black skirt, looking both professional and attractive. "A lot of kids might struggle in English if you keep dressing like that," he joked softly. She smiled brightly. "No way! I'm a great teacher, and they will all do well." As lunch continued, she noticed the pleased expressions on the faces of the four parents and wondered what was happening. She frowned, glanced at Scott, and raised her hands in question. With a playful smile, he said, "Sabrina, would you like to look at some houses with us this afternoon? Turns out my parents, who never talked about moving until today, have new jobs here and need a place to stay. My dad will work at the bank, and my mom will teach English at the high school. There's a house in your neighborhood that seems perfect for them, but the realtor also has details about a really interesting house on 10 acres. It has a fenced yard, a pool, and even a tennis court. Plus, high-speed internet is available. Isn't that great? Also, everyone in town is looking for a security consultant. Isn't that a lucky coincidence? Oh, and there are 2 gyms in town and a tennis league that plays on Wednesday nights." At first, she didn't grasp everything he said, but when he mentioned the pool and tennis court, she leaned in, intrigued. Once he finished, Sabrina responded, "Those really are amazing coincidences. It feels like everything is falling into place for a reason. I would love to go. I'm planning to move into a garage apartment next week so my parents can have privacy. But it would be fantastic to have your parents here too. I can't wait to see the houses available." Then she looked a bit sad. "It's too bad you have your job and life back in Austin. Ken and Melissa, Cody and Sarah, and all your friends here are going to miss you after tomorrow. Maybe you can come visit your parents sometimes and we'll finally get to see you. Of course, you'll miss the swim parties in September, playing tennis with us, and Friday night lights in our small town. But you can return to your routine of working out, going to work, and playing tennis a few evenings a week. I'm sure Duke loves living in your cozy apartment." "Et tu, Brute," he said with a big sigh. She smiled. "All right, let's make it happen. Mom and Dad, let's find your dream home." It didn't take long. The house for sale across from the Reichtars was everything they had dreamed of for their retirement years. It had a well-kept lawn with a sprinkler system and beautiful flower beds. The price was right, so the main thing to work out was that the sellers would help with financing until they sold their house in the Woodlands. It was a deal done when they walked out the front door, but there was still paperwork to handle. Oddly, everyone insisted on looking at the other house before finalizing the paperwork. The realtor seemed confused until Brianna whispered something in her ear, and then she looked smug like the others, and it turned out to be someone's dream home as well. The open layout was bright, with lovely granite counters and high-quality appliances. The bedrooms were spacious with plenty of closet and bathroom space. The layout was ideal for a family, Outside, everything was just as he would have done. The landscaping featured local plants and grass that didn't need much water. A large live oak tree provided shade on one side, and a grand post oak was out front. There was a covered porch in the back with a stone pathway leading to a pool that was just a few steps away. The pool was raised to keep water from flowing in, and there were 2 steps leading up to the hot tub, which poured water into the heated pool as a waterfall. The lighted tennis court, made of strong concrete and covered with a special material, looked brand new, with no marks at all on the surface. It was as nice as any court he had ever played on, even in high-level tournaments. About 100 yards out, 2 deer were munching on plants, and their spotted fawns were resting under the shade of nearby oak trees. When they stepped outside, the deer glanced up, lifted their tails, observed the visitors for a moment, then returned to eating. Doug led everyone to the barn that also served as a workshop and garage, mentioning that part of it could be turned into a workout space if anyone wanted. The realtor pointed out highlights throughout the tour of the home and its surroundings, but she still had one more good reason to share. The owners had decided to move closer to their children and grandchildren after the husband experienced a minor health issue. They had enough money and another house and were open to helping with the sale if she found suitable buyers. She explained that in the current unpredictable economy, they preferred regular monthly payments to a lump sum, but wanted a reliable buyer. They asked for a 5% down payment, with monthly payments sent directly to their account. Scott knew he had the cash, steady income, and a good credit score, and he thought this place was perfect. But instead of quickly agreeing with the excitement from Sabrina, the 4 parents, and the realtor, he said, "Please give me a little time to think. I'll get back to you soon." After they walked to their cars and thanked the realtor for the tour, Scott said, "I need to have a talk with all of you. I'd like Roy and Anita, Ken and Melissa and Sarah and Cody to be there too. But I want to do it tonight, so it might not work for everyone. Is there a place we can meet?" Scott's serious look and firm voice showed that this was an important matter. His dad asked what time he had in mind, and Scott said 7 would work best. The Reichtars quickly offered their home, and Brianna and Helen said they would prepare a sandwich platter for anyone who hadn't eaten. Sabrina said she would call everyone to arrange it. Scott then asked if he could use the office at the shop for a few hours to wrap up some things and prepare. To the concerned looks around him, he replied, "I would rather not explain more right now. Just give me until 7, please." He received 5 nods and headed to the shop. Scott entered the den with a notepad in hand and said, "Thank you for coming on short notice. I know this is serious, but you all deserve to hear my story, and I promise to share it only once. First of all, I don't have cancer or some other serious illness, nor have I done something that would make me leave the country. So with those worries out of the way, no one in this room knows what I'm about to share, not even my parents. But I know you want to understand what really happened with Amelia that led to me becoming a widower at 24. It's a tough story, and the only way I've been able to get through it is by filling my days with activities. My acquaintances in Austin think I might have a condition because I stick to a strict daily routine. I don't have any real friends there, partly due to COVID, but mainly because I've kept myself from forming any close relationships since the beginning of 2020. So when Ken began inviting me in early spring to join the tournament, I turned him down repeatedly. I couldn't allow any emotional connections. I try to keep my feelings hidden, not because I'm afraid of feeling sad again, but because I worry about the anger inside me getting out. I'm not perfect. I want to be honest with you because you are my friends and family, and I don't want to hurt you. It's better if you keep some distance, just like Darian should have. You saw a bit of my anger on the court, but if he had said those things when we were alone... You understand what I mean. So what caused my pain? Amelia. Amelia and her parents hurt me deeply. Amelia was an only child. She was strong-willed, sometimes difficult, and had her own opinions, but she also brought a lot of joy. She was curious and very clever. In her own way, she loved me more than anyone else except for herself, and maybe her father. I knew I was second. I didn't realize I was third. Amelia was very social since she was little, or so her friends later told me in emails. After we got married, she dropped out of school to work for her dad. When the shutdown happened in March 2020, his business was not seen as essential and had to close. He, his wife, and Amelia were upset about the decision, thinking it was unfair that their business had to close while bigger stores stayed open. They blamed politics instead of focusing on safety. Her father politically was far to the right. This affected Amelia, especially after she started working for him. He often shared wild opinions and conspiracy theories, quoting websites that spread false information. Amelia would bring his strange ideas to me, and I would try to show her credible information to disprove what he was saying. Eventually, she stopped sharing those ideas with me. I thought she had come to her senses, but it turned out she didn't want to hear anything that challenged her family's beliefs, even if there was no real evidence behind them. I was busy with work and school from home and encouraged Amelia to take online classes, hoping she would return to her studies. I spent a lot of hours in my office while she was at the dining table for the same amount of time. What I didn't know was that she wasn't enrolled in classes at all. She was chatting with others who shared those same odd beliefs. I found all of this out much later when I went through her computer. If I had been checking on her, I would have seen the path she was on and noticed that she had started talking to Darian Huxley online. I always trusted my wife and thought it was wrong to pry into her life, so I had no clue what was happening until I found out she was on a ventilator with serious COVID. That's when I started to look into things, and what I discovered was shocking. Darian had been influencing her from the beginning. He took advantage of her anger about how the government treated her father and filled her head with strange ideas and untrue medical advice from unreliable sources. He even quoted a leader from earlier, downplaying the seriousness of COVID. By March, that same leader was declaring a national emergency and shutting things down, but they still held on to his earlier statements. They believed he was just pretending it was a real threat because of powerful people who would harm him and his family. Darian told her he and his friends were rebelling against the government by hosting get-togethers at a place outside of town, inviting her to join in on the fun with others who thought like them. I had no idea this was happening, but soon she insisted we needed to leave our apartment and do something. In early April, we were advised not to travel unless it was like an emergency or to get groceries. She wanted to visit some old friends who lived in the countryside, claiming they weren't bothered by the strict rules. Knowing her friends wouldn't take any precautions and would be partying instead of keeping distance, I said no. She got angry and called me names before going to her parents' house to cool off. When she ended up in the hospital, her parents finally told me they had encouraged her to go to the party, convinced it was all a scheme to undermine a politician. She went to the party where she danced and drank, and for 10 days, she didn't answer her phone or let anyone know where she was. I was worried sick. Her parents wouldn't tell me anything, and the authorities said she was an adult and could make her own choices, so they didn't take a missing person report. When she came back staying at her parents' house and not our apartment, she had lost over 15 pounds. She was already thin, and now she looked even worse. She had a terrible sore throat, a bad cough, and a fever. They gave her some medicine recommended by people who weren't real doctors, but her condition got worse. I had no knowledge of this. Her parents told me she had left because she was tired of being married to me and kept her at their home. Eventually, when her fever went up and she was struggling to breathe, they finally took her to the emergency room. That was when they discovered she had COVID-19. She was hospitalized and her parents had to quarantine, and soon they got sick too. Emily faced a very difficult day, which was the same day their child passed away, but her father just had a bad case of the flu. Scott took a long drink from his beer, wiped a tear from his cheek in frustration, and looked back at the people around him who were feeling sad. He knew things would get harder to talk about, but he pushed on, hoping it wouldn't hurt him too much again or ruin his relationships with the people who made life worth living. Amelia was on a breathing machine and was not fully awake for days, getting worse every day. I couldn't go to see her, and she couldn't speak with the tube in her throat, but sometimes she managed to talk to me when she was awake. Most of the time, she said she was sorry for the awful things I did without saying what those things were. As her condition worsened, she apologized for not believing me and for teasing me. She asked me to forgive her. I told her I forgave her and I hoped to see her again one day. But when her parents came to me later and asked for my forgiveness after her memorial service, I told them they could never be forgiven. They cried and pleaded, but I walked away, leaving them holding the urn with her ashes. This was weeks later, after they finally let go of her body, but my pain didn't lessen at all. It's a bit better now, but just talking about it makes me angry at them and at Darian, too. Oh, I forgot to mention this important detail. Darian didn't just stumble upon her. He was watching me online and managed to find her on Facebook. He started following her and learned about her views on different topics. But that is not all. Here's the shocking part. He knew the owner of the house had COVID, or at least showed the symptoms, and they went ahead with the gathering anyway. He is the one who spread the virus and caused Amelia's death. The unfairness of it all is that Darian never got sick, even after spending so much time with my wife and recording it. I found out because he sent me a copy just before her memorial service. And he wasn't the only one. Others were involved too. Amelia was so affected by whatever they gave her that she barely moved, but she also didn't refuse. Do I forgive Darian and the others? Well, I don't have to forgive the house owner. He has already passed away. He died from COVID just days before Amelia. As for the others, I wish with all my heart that they got sick and suffered like she did, Scott said quietly. So, when I say I'm hurting, I hope you understand what I mean. More forcefully, he added, one last thing, you can believe whatever you want, but do not ever bring that up with me. Feeling a bit embarrassed now, he sighed deeply. He looked at his parents and Sabrina and said, and now you see why I'm so hesitant to settle down here. I have a lot left to understand. It was very quiet. Even though everyone seemed heartbroken, none of them were crying, they just looked really sad. Any questions? This is your only chance. He waited, but no one said anything. Okay, thanks for listening to me. I wish I had kept it to myself. No, Sarah shouted. Don't say that. I've known you like a brother for over 5 years, and I care about you more than ever right now, Scott. I know everyone here feels the same way. Sarah pointed to her family, who all nodded in agreement. You showed a lot of courage sharing your story with us tonight. My love and respect for you have never been stronger. When Sarah started to speak, Scott turned to her. As she finished, he felt her arms around him from behind. Sarah spoke softly in his ear. I've only known you for 5 days, but I felt connected to you the moment I saw you in the parking lot. You might not believe in love at first sight, but that's how I felt. Your story is sad, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. It makes me want to comfort you and help you forget the bad memories. I just want to create happy moments with you until the past feels distant. Our caring parents have good intentions, even if you think they are pushing you too hard. They want to help you break free from the struggles you faced. They want you to be with true friends who love you. And I want you here because I care about you. I believe my love can help you heal, and that can bring us closer together. Please, give us a chance. Move here, among people who care for you, and give yourself a chance to start fresh. You clearly want to leave the past behind and start living again, she said. Then she playfully teased him. I could see that during everything we did together this weekend, especially at the cabin and by the river. If it helps, everyone here is vaccinated, and I don't think any of us know who Alex Jones is. She turned him around and pulled him closer. I promise in front of God and everyone here, if you open your heart to me, I will never give you a reason to regret it. It was September 17th, and summer was ending next week, so they had one last swimming party at the river cabin. It was their close group of friends, Ken, Melissa, Cody, and Sarah, making it a fun and relaxing weekend. Scott ended the special weekend by getting down on one knee in front of his girlfriend, who was wearing a bikini, and asking her to marry him. That evening, he discovered that she had quite a few surprises and was full of energy. She confidently told him there was much more to share with him as her husband. On Monday, Scott bought a house. He arranged for movers to take everything from his apartment and bring it to his new home. With help from his friends and family, he set up the house. His mother, his fiancée, and her mother also helped him choose the furniture and decorations. Scott let them make most of the choices, but he picked out a sturdy 4-poster bed with a comfortable mattress for the master bedroom, along with a cozy love seat recliner for their media room, complete with drink holders. Sabrina kept her promise, and their honeymoon in New Zealand, where it was summer, felt like a dream. Scott found that summer adventures can be wonderful no matter where you are. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.